Sunlight poured down as a boy locked his gaze forward, and the sight before him sent a grin bursting across his face. A girl with a lovely smile pulled him along into a tucked-away settlement and threw her arms wide to welcome him into their village. A week ago, on the outskirts of the royal capital, Alfred Raint, an S-class veteran mage with almost 30 years behind him, shut himself away and sank into a rare, hard-earned calm at home. A sharp knock rattled Al's door, and a voice shouted they were coming in. The boy spun and instantly recognized Luca's voice. A twin ponytail girl stormed to his door and snapped, "Is Alfred still doing nothing?" She was Luca, an S-class swordswoman and doctor. Luca erupted, shouting that Cruz and Urena had already taken down the monsters, and Alfred laughed that the guys hadn't changed a bit, still bursting with energy. Luca burst into laughter and demanded, "What are you talking about, Al?" She scoffed that he sounded like an old man, and the guy shot back, "Am I really that old?" Out of nowhere, Luca demanded, "How's Al's knee?" The man hoisted his pant leg, winced, and admitted it hurt. There was nothing to be done. The girl snapped he was a liar, accused him of being far too rowdy at the party, and Alfred, unsurprised, admired her razor-sharp Dr. Hone perception. He seethed, thinking it was insultingly low pay. For Al's young team of heroes, finally forcing the Demon King to his knees brought their long, grueling journey crashing to an end. Alfred baited the king, letting the heroes cut him down, but as the monarch teetered, he swung one last time and drove a crushing, critical blow into Alfred. A bullet ripped into Alfred's knee, and in a heartbeat they leapt into heroism. The royal family and the Adventurers Guild pinned medals and showered praise on the boy, crowning him the first S-rank in 200 years, while Alfred stood speechless, gratitude choking his throat. Lucas slammed down the verdict. The boy's knee was cursed for life. No healing magic could touch it. The boy slumped, head bowed, and muttered he'd expected no less from the Demon King's curse. Luca jabbed the guy's knee, and he gave a sharp gasp. The girl turned away and warned him not to strain himself too much, and Alfred bristled, wondering if she'd come just to laugh at him. He grabbed the medicine Luca had left on the table, stunned she'd actually gone to that much trouble. He sighed and let out a rueful laugh. It was so like Luca. He crashed onto the bed, Alfred a battle-scarred adventurer of many years, convinced he'd earned this hard-won rest, and as he settled, a sharp ache flared in his knee. A man barreled into the room and blurted to Alfred that he had to ask the boy something. Alfred snapped to his feet, every muscle coiling as he figured it must be the Lord Marshal. The boy bellowed, "What's wrong?" And the man roared that he wanted Alfred to form and lead a magical knightly order. He proclaimed that even with the Demon King slain, monsters still prowled the land, and he wanted Alfred, backed by hard-won victories and battle-hardened experience, to take the task. Alfred, cheeks burning, fumbled and realized it was a tremendous honor. He forced himself to admit he couldn't keep fighting like this. He let his head fall, whispered his thanks, and then sank into silence. Silence cracked, understanding flared in the Lord Marshal's eyes. He called it unfortunate, then thundered that he wanted Alfred to train the royal court's mages. Dread coiled in his gut, but relentless persuasion broke him. He caved and showed up at the party. Suddenly someone blurted, "That's Lord Rint himself," and Alfred froze, disbelief crashing over him as the guild's great master stood before him. The man smiled and said he'd meant to visit Alfred but couldn't, and Alfred snapped, "What difference does that make?"
Well,
The guildmaster confessed he'd been plotting to raise a new adventurers guild in the Demon King's old territory, declared he wanted Alfred the leader in every sense, and grinned as he urged them to hammer out every last detail. All evening people swarmed the guy, bombarding him with questions and whispers. Alfred replayed how awful it had been, and when the night finally ended, he went home, and the instant he stepped inside he collapsed onto the bed. By now his knee screamed with searing pain, every move a white-hot stab. He thrashed on the floor, realizing he couldn't rest here. He'd never imagined an S-rank would cause this much trouble, and though he'd sworn countless promises to king and country, this had crossed every limit. His recovery mattered more than any of it. He sprawled on the floor, obsessing over how to find rest, thinking so long dawn crept in and he didn't even notice. The next morning the boy perched on his bed, readied himself, hoisted his bag and stepped out of the house. Alfred braced himself. He was moments away from leaving the royal capital. After a sleepless night wrestling with his thoughts, he realized a vacation would only kick up a fuss, so he grabbed the guild's quest, convinced it would settle everything. She stalks tasks with 3 ruthless rules. They must look effortless, come from a village as far from the capital as possible, and be the kind that will keep her busy for ages. Alfred spotted the perfect assignment form, strode up to the reception desk and reported it. The girl at the desk smiled, scanned the paper, then gasped and asked if he truly meant to accept that. A Rankef quest landed in their laps. The job was to recruit guards for the village. Relentless wild boars and wolves pounced on them without mercy. The adventurers earned food and shelter for their trouble, and Alfred shouted, "This is exactly what I needed." She spun away, insisting it was early and she was alone and should check with her superiors. Alfred exploded that everything was fine and it was urgent, and she had to agree, which made him beam. The reward's meager and he shrugs, with a rank tacked to his name. Benefits will come even if he does nothing, and he'd planned to retire to a simple country life. A week later, Alfred reached his destination at last. He clambered out of the transport, bracing to walk the rest of the way, brutal on his knee, but at a slow, steady pace he could endure it. The boy beamed. The day was perfect for a walk. 3 hours into the trek, Alfred found nothing but an endless sea of trees. Then, without warning, a thunderous clamor shattered the silence. He instantly recognized the sounds as an animal and a man. Alfred surged toward them, instinct screaming this was trouble. Suddenly, a girl's piercing scream slammed into him. She roared she wouldn't give up that easily. From the sidelines, the guy's eyes locked onto her impossibly beautiful pointed ears as she traded blows with the wolf and refused to back down. She turned and everyone saw she was an elf, lithe and otherworldly. He pegged her as brave, but her knees betrayed her. Suddenly, a sharp scent slammed into the wolf, attacking the elf. The monster spun toward Alfred and unleashed a thunderous bark. The boy realized Alfred had caught the wolf's attention. He stormed forward and bellowed he could handle the monster, and Alfred was convinced foes like that could be beaten without a scrap of magic. The monster barreled at the guy, teeth bared. Alfred seized the wolf's jaw and slammed it into the ground. The wolf panicked and bolted, and in that heartbeat Alfred heard the girl's voice thanking the guy for his help. Alfred answered, "Everything's fine." He burst out, "How are you?" She shot back, "I'm fine." Then an elf suddenly interjected, "Her name isn't you, it's Millet," and Alfred instantly bowed his head and apologized to her. He stepped forward and introduced himself. Millet beamed and thanked Al, and the guy blinked, a faint surprise flickering across his face. He'd adventured for years. Thank yous were routine, yet every grateful word still sparked a fierce thrill in him. Alfred beamed and said he was glad to hear it, and the boy immediately blurted, "What is Milk doing alone in a place this dangerous?" She burst out that her little sister was burning with fever, racked by pain. Their village had no medicine left, so she'd raced here to gather whatever healing herbs she could. He caught her meaning in a heartbeat. Millet opened her mouth to say more, but Alfred cut her off, snapping that he might not look the part, but he's a doctor. She warned that the whole village had branded the place dangerous and said wolves would appear there, but if Millet failed to cure his sister, the outcome would be catastrophic. Alfred demanded to know if the girl was gathering herbs. Millet snapped it wasn't true. Wolves prowled these woods this year. She never should have come here. Wolves and monsters had already devoured everything there. Alfred snapped, so it's useless. The girl suddenly declared she was sure that if she plunged deeper into the mountains she'd find something. Alfred gasped and demanded, stunned that she'd really go up there alone. The boy recoiled, calling it terrible. Though it was summer, the sun had already raced well past noon. Alfred wasn't cruel enough to leave the brave Millet alone. If he lingered to help her, he'd never reach the village before the gates slammed shut at sunset. He refused to sleep outside, and splitting up here would leave the girl to be eaten. Alfred's conscience roared. He couldn't let that happen. Millet was about to step away when Alfred's voice burst after her, urgently asking permission to help research the herbs. Her breath caught in surprise. Alfred flashed a relaxed grin, saying he wasn't in a hurry and that an adult would make things more comfortable. Millet beamed and thanked him. He demanded she tell him, if she could, where these herbs grow. In a flash, Millet lunged, seized his hands, then let him go, and Alfred snapped that she shouldn't be so hasty. He could have sworn the elf was beaming with joy. The girl cried out that this place teemed with plant life. No herbal scent lingered. When the man asked what to look for, Millet snapped that they should hunt for green ivy shaped like a hand, then his shoulders slumped. He feared even here the herbs had been eaten. Alfred asked if there were any other places to go. The girl collapsed to the floor and gasped that a cave lay 30 minutes away, but there was a catch. The guy demanded, "What's wrong?" Millet's shoulders slumped as he warned that a basilisk had recently moved into the cave, and Alfred's jaw dropped. This demonic basilisk is a B-rank nightmare. One glance petrifies, its tail and blood seethe with lethal poison, and if you cut it, the venom will spray everywhere and unleash total disaster. Alfred was convinced a B-ranked group could defeat the monster somehow, and the boy reassured the shaken Millet, boasting that an old man like Alfred ate basilisks for breakfast. Millet's eyes went wide and she lunged, yanking the man and screaming that this was deadly, not a foe you could beat so easily. Alfred pushed past her panic, steady and fierce. "Everything's fine, I'll defeat him." Alfred skidded to the cave's mouth and hissed, "You smell those herbs too, don't you?" Millet's eyes flashed and she nodded once hard. Alfred snatched the herb basket from Millet's hands and told her to wait outside. She froze in surprise, and he smiled, saying everything was fine. If anything happens, scream and he'll sprint to her at once. Tension coiled in her eyes as she stared at him, lips sealed. Alfred plunged into a dark, bottomless cave. He realized the plants were untouched. There were simply too many for anyone to have touched. Alfred crouched among the herbs when a sound at his back snapped him rigid. A hulking snake silhouette coiled behind him, and realization slammed into him. The basilisk had appeared. The monster slithered up right behind the man, coiled like a spring, waiting for Alfred to turn around. The basilisk lashed its tail at the boy, but Alfred snapped the strike aside and slammed a glowing magic circle underfoot, throwing up a shield that kept the monster from touching him. The magic circle shielded Alfred from attacks as the boy stayed calm and plucked medicinal herbs. After gathering a few plants, doubt hammered at him. Would it be enough? He snatched a pebble from the ground and spat, "It's nothing personal." He locked the stone in his fist and began siphoning raw, crackling magic into himself. He vowed he'd savor the monster's defeat. Basilisk, hearing that, felt terror seize him. He lunged at the man again, only to find him already poised to strike. A small stone, crackling with speed magic, zipped forward. Alfred hurled a rock at the monster's skull. It shot clean through, ripping a hole in the basilisk's head, and the guy knew he'd been cocky. The last time he'd faced basilisks was ages ago. Alfred flinched at the thought of dirtying the cave, certain his clumsiness would soil it. In this cave, the herbs will erupt into life, year after year. The boy burst outside and found Malate sitting on the ground, waiting for him. The girl kept whipping back in terror until a voice cut through. She snapped her head up and saw Alfred calling her to him. Millet rushed up, breathlessly asking if he was okay. He nodded and pressed a basket of herbs into the girl's hands. She accepted it with a broad smile and thanked Alfred for his help. Alfred ripped the basilisk's head free, muttered a quick apology, then said he was hauling the body out and needed her help. Millet gaped, disbelief clawing at her. Alfred had actually defeated the basilisk. The boy blurted, stunned, "What's so special about it?" And the girl turned to him, eyes wide, gasping, "It's amazing." She raved that Owl was a beast, a basilisk-killing expert, while he stared at her, stunned, as she kept singing his praises. While Millet bragged about Alfred's strength, the boy slammed a hand over his face, cringing at the crushing awkwardness. The girl yanked her cape and declared that if Alfred was going to cut the monster, she could help one way or another if needed. She shrugged off her cloak, leaving just a small jacket on her upper body. Alfred froze, spun away, and blurted that he hadn't meant it. They'd only accidentally locked eyes. Alfred exhaled and admitted the monster was colossal, then turned to Malate. "What do you make of it?" The girl snapped that it was crushingly heavy. After that, Alfred snapped his dagger free and carved into the monster's corpse. Together, they plunged into relentless, back-breaking work. He kicked things off by selling his tail, then his fangs and eyeballs. Each one fetched a fortune. They drained the basilisk's blood into vials for medicine, cured its useful skin, and feasted on the meat. Nothing of the beast went to waste, and together they finished the brutal work. Alfred erupted with gratitude, shouting that Millet had helped him immensely. The children, bursting with joy, clasped hands. Evening had already fallen. Alfred barked that the sun was dipping, so they should make camp by the cave. Millet trembled but forced a yes to the proposal. Alfred caught the change, fear for the girls written on his face, and snapped, "What's the matter?" Millet froze and spat out that everything was fine. Then a sound ripped from the trees behind the boys, and he screamed as he lunged to grab Alfred. Realization slammed into Millet, and her face flamed crimson. Alfred stared at her in slight bewilderment, and she spun away from him, blurting that she was simply afraid of the night forest. Millet's grin lit up his face as he swore the girl had nothing to fear. He'd protect his lady. Millet urged her not to worry. A flicker of doubt crept in, and the girl flushed. By nightfall, the boys had the camp pitched and their food crackling over the fire. Millet sipped water in silence while Alfred brooded, his eyes lost in the void. The guy blurted, "Millet, are you okay?" The girl shrugged, saying she'd borrowed his coat and was fine. It was warm outside, and Alfred thought the night was thickening, the darkness growing darker and darker. Alfred leaned in and asked Millet if she was hungry, then pushed a plate of sizzling fried cheese toward her. She smiled, said she was fine, and thanked Alfred for the offer. While the guy chowed down, Millet rubbed her eyes. He asked if she was nodding off, and she admitted she couldn't sleep because it felt a little weird. Alfred figured she wasn't cut out for sleeping on the street. Out of nowhere, the girl snapped, "Why are you here?" His face went blank at her question. She reminded him she'd been mauled by wolves. Alfred said he was already heading to the village where he'd accepted the mission. The girl said she understood, and silence fell again. The girl blurted, worry tight in her voice, "Will the assignment be okay? You're late." Alfred shrugged and said the mission seemed to have no time limit. Millet practically buzzed with excitement and asked where he was headed. If it wasn't far, she'd walk him there. The boy announced the place as the village of Merg, turned to Millet and asked if he'd heard of it, and the girl beamed, proudly declaring it was her village. Surprise slammed into Alfred, and relief washed over him. His village life suddenly looked like it would get easier from now on. She shot him a look and asked, "So Alfred's going to be living in our village for some time?" He nodded, sealing it. Silence crashed back in. Millet turned to Alfred and let out a soft, knowing chuckle. He caught on to this. He was sure being a guard wouldn't be so bad. He'd throw himself between danger and every fragile smile. He plunged into life, letting carelessness tattoo itself on his soul. Alfred, a veteran sorcerer, had just repaired the Demon King when, at the very last moment, an immortal striking arrow slammed into him. Fearing for his life, he pulled back to rest. The high society aristocrats hounded him without mercy, driving him out of the royal capital. He claimed a rest befitting the village's protector. Millet steered him back, so he arrived at the village unscathed. Alfred pushed through the village gates and couldn't help but marvel at how lovely it was. Millet beamed, thanked him, and assured him he'd fit in before long. Millet's return set the village roaring. People sprinted to her, cheering and crowding to ask if she was all right. She gasped an apology for the scare, and the kids swarmed, pointing at the man behind her and clamoring to know who he was. Millet barked to seize everyone's attention and jabbed a finger at him. "That's Alfred." She declared he was a mountain of strength with a kind heart, the man who had saved her earlier. Alfred gaped, astonishment burning in his chest, as she revealed he'd helped her gather a special kind of herb and had watched over her all night without once closing his eyes. Shyness crept over the boy. He wanted to stop Millet, but she barreled on, shouting with electric joy that Alfred had defeated the basilisk. The villagers stunned before the crowd erupted, everyone shouting how great Alfred was. Residents swarmed him, pouring out thanks and staring at the raw strength of the young man. Millet charged forward, waved at Alfred, and cried that she needed to prepare the medicine. A middle-aged man with cat ears strode up to Alfred and announced he'd heard a ton about the guy. It was the village chief. Alfred fired off a quick apology, said he had to introduce himself, then dropped into a deep bow and declared he'd taken on the duty of guardian of the village of Merg. When he announced his name, Alfred Rint, the villagers fell eerily silent. A boy's stomach dropped with nerves, but the crowd quickly erupted, shouting they'd throw a party to honor Alfred's arrival. Alfred froze, bewilderment clawing at him, as the village chief declared he'd escort him to the residence they'd prepared, then led him to a crumbling, dilapidated house. He winced and apologized for the house's shabby state, saying it was the guard's home. Alfred shrugged, grinned, and insisted it was fine. He actually liked it. Alfred shoved open the creaking door, blinked at the house's undeniable age but swallowed a grateful breath. There was a roof and even a bed. He asked the village chief to lay out the details of his work, and the man nodded, shoving a chair into place before him. He told Alfred to soak up the sun, then planted himself on a chair in front of the gate. The boy gaped. The old man barked that the fellow's whole job was to repel invasions from beyond the walls, but invaders were practically non-existent, and Alfred wondered if they even needed a guard here. The head barked that the boy would work the fields by day, and whenever the villagers dared leave the village, he'd throw himself between them and the bandits and wolves waiting outside. The leader grimly announced their chance to join the battle was nearly zero. Alfred flashed a cocky grin and vowed he could get them in. A tremor of nerves ran through the old man as he blurted that Alfred looked like a veteran and must be frustrated with such tasks. The boy snapped back immediately that it wasn't true at all. The old man admitted the villagers, himself included, had been waiting to see a young man, so a flicker of surprise crossed his face. The truth hit Alfred like a blow. They only wanted a young boy, which explained their sharp reaction, and the old man beckoned him onward, leading Alfred on a brisk tour of the village. Alfred saw through the villagers' plot, lure the young man, wed him to one of the marriageable girls, and chain him into living there for good. The young adventurers refused to be shackled by that fate. The chief demanded to know why Alfred became a guard. The boy admitted he'd injured his knee years ago, and the old man chuckled, then let him soak in the village hot springs. They help wounds heal. That same night, the village chief's house erupted into a raucous party. Everyone slammed back drinks and howled with joy until late into the night. Alfred lay in his room, chasing sleep, but the loud sounds clung to the air and wouldn't let him drift off. Alfred shot to his feet as the wolves closed in, dread flaring at the thought of the village suffering on his first day. He steeled himself. First impressions could make or break him, so he lunged at the problem before the villagers could write him off as a loser. He tore out of the house, barreled into the street, and stopped cold at the sight of something completely unthinkable. Alfred gaped as a breathtaking, enchanted wolf materialized and stood right before him. Alfred, battle-scarred and world-weary, froze. He'd never seen a wolf this breathtaking. Among the ancient magical beasts, some could command magic itself. The wolf lunged, snarling like thunder as it hurled a jagged blast of magic at Alfred, and the boy slammed his hands over his face. The howl ripped through the air with raw magic, the kind that would freeze a simple adventurer stone still. The wolf lunged again, but Alfred clamped onto his muzzle, slammed him into the dirt, then kicked him. Wave after wave of wolves surged at the boy, but he weaved between their fangs and cut them down with effortless precision. He'd been convinced they were all magical. Then a colossal wolf loomed forward as their leader, and that wolf alone could wield magic. I counted roughly 20 wolves, but they rolled on like a dark river, everyone snapping to their leader's command. He charged straight at the leader. He figured unleashing thunderfire here would torch everything, but water would be his undoing. He resolved that what he'd done was the best move. Alfred unleashed accelerated magical barriers that slammed into them with brutal, impossible speed. The attack slammed in, and the boy's jaw dropped as the wolf slipped the blow. In a heartbeat, the wolf sprang up behind Alfred. Alfred only shrugged and grinned, not bad at all. A predatory grin curled his lips as he spun back and lunged at him, snickering at how amusing it all was. He unleashed his magic again, slamming a devastating strike into the wolf's stomach and blasting the beast flying backward. He hurtled backward, flipping head over heels. Alfred snarled he'd love to slaughter them all, but if they left the village of Merg alone, he'd let them walk away alive. Magic crackled inside the beast, so it understood human speech as if it were second nature. Alfred thundered that he was a sorcerer. Had he unleashed his full power from the first moment, every last follower of the wolf would already be dead. He swore he could annihilate them all, but that would swell the wild herds and unleash a stampede that would tear the fields to ruin, so he set the wolf and its pack free. He ruled out massacring everyone, pointless. He only wanted the wolf to heed him, and then the monster shot to its feet. Alfred froze as the wolf's thought crashed into his head. "I understand everything," it snarled, then branded the boy a powerful child. The boy's eyes went wide as he realized it was telepathy and couldn't believe a wolf could reach inside his mind. The wolf gritted his teeth and confessed it was his fault. Alfred gaped at that obedient twist, and the wolf seethed that even he couldn't make Alfred take things seriously. The boy yanked the wolf to a halt, declared he respected the creature's strength and wisdom as a magical beast, introduced himself as Alfred Rint, and the wolf confessed it had no name and begged Alfred to give it one. The boy paused a beat, then blurted, "I'll name you Gilgal," and the wolf's face drained to a ghostly ashen. The boy shook his head, this wasn't it, and offered Puffy as a suggestion. The wolf's patience snapped and anger flared. The animal showed no hostility, and he took to it instantly. The wolf christened himself Femi and vowed that, as long as he remained alpha, his pack would never lay a paw on the village of Merg. He insisted he was doing it to make amends for disturbing Alfred's men. The boy practically beamed that he was happy, convinced the villagers were trembling and needed something to steady them, and Femi shot back, "Do you really want the wolf's head as a trophy?" Alfred drained of color as the wolf grinned, saying he was joking, then abruptly spat something out. Alfred snatched a sharp object from the ground, and Femi said if the boy showed it to those people, they'd understand. Alfred collapsed onto his bed and grinned. This magical wolf wasn't so bad. Femi loomed with jaw-dropping size and bone-crushing strength, his mind razor-sharp, and his skin flashed molten gold beneath the moon. Alfred couldn't deny it, she was soft. The boy felt something against him and relished it, sure it was exactly how touching a wolf would feel. Then his whole face was suddenly soaked. He sprang out of bed, blinking, wondering what had drenched him. Femi planted themselves right in front of him. He slammed into the dirt and shouted, "What's going on?" The wolf's voice flooded his head again, snapping that it was rude. Fear slammed into the boy. "Are you Femi, the magical wolf?" He choked out, and the wolf confirmed it with a low, undeniable growl. Alfred's jaw dropped when Femi suddenly shrank, and the wolf wagged his tail proudly, grinning as he said, "That's about it, it's really nice." He was about to tell why he'd come back, but Alfred reached out and started petting Femi, saying he couldn't resist the soft fur. Femi the wolf bristled with fury and snapped at the boy, "Don't treat me like a dog." The boy raked his hands over the wolf's coat, and the truth hit him. The animal was nothing but skin and bone. The wolf asked for a favor, and Alfred instantly understood. The wolf wanted to be able to turn to him whenever trouble reared its head. He never expected Femi to show up that very day. The wolf had poured every ounce into changing form, yet a promise was a promise. He demanded to know what Femi's wanted. The wolf snarled that it had paid him to talk, but the land that once belonged to magical wolves now lies shattered and unrecognizable. After the previous wolf king died, the wild boars launched relentless assaults, driving the magical wolves out of their territory. Alfred's breath hitched as he finally understood why the previous generation of Femis had called this land home. Femis, now king of the magical wolves, led his pack into battle, but the lead magical boar slammed back with crushing power. The land no longer fed them. Alfred finally understood why Femi was so thin. The wolf sagged to its haunches. The boy realized thin didn't even begin to describe them. The wolf snarled it was why they'd attacked the village. Alfred leapt in and stopped them, and the guy just shrugged, saying he'd been lucky. Wolf roared that the clock was closing in. It was a race against time. Femi begged Alfred to split his power with him and the others. The guy slammed his hand over his face and scoffed that he didn't mind, but he couldn't imagine a magical wolf losing to a mere wild boar. Femi erupted, declaring they were unbelievably strong. Alfred nodded, his smile softening as he kept thinking how cute the wolf was. Fem declared Alfred couldn't sense her at all, a dead giveaway that his presence sensing is passive and rooted, more plant than person. Shock ripped through the boy. He couldn't sense the pack's intent to kill. The boy swallowed and admitted he had no choice but to accept the wolf's offer. Femi beamed, happily declaring she was proud of Alfred. The guy left the room, calling back that it was late and he was going to bed. He barked at the wolf to take him to the wild boar the next day. The very next morning Femi abruptly thanked Alfred and left him utterly stunned. The boy spun to Femi and bade him goodbye, marveling at how understanding the wolf was. Then Alfred collapsed back onto the bed, cramped and warm as Femi curled up against him. The boy scoffed that it didn't matter, then blurted, "Why are wild boars so strong?" And Femi himself had no answer. A jolt hit Alfred as he remembered the gasp he'd sparked when he'd flashed Femi's fang at everyone. The wolf sat unfazed, and the boy said he'd been told the same by the village head when he'd shown his own fang. Doubt clawed at him. Did Femi truly recognize Alfred as his master? The wolf flinched, eyes widening at the question. He folded into a silent cuddle. The guy snorted that Femi was acting like a dog again. He wanted the wolf to stop. At dawn, Femi bombarded Alfred's face with relentless, wet licks, desperate to jolt the boy awake. A voice cut through the room. "Are you awake?" Alfred greeted Millet standing in the doorway, and the girl called out, "Good morning." She announced she'd brought him breakfast. Alfred smiled, thanked her, and swore he wouldn't starve. Then the guy's gaze snapped to Femi as she began to twirl at Millet's feet. She burst into laughter, cooing that he was unbearably adorable, then swept Fem into a warm hug, insisting her little sister would be over the moon to see him. Alfred proclaimed the wolf's name, Fem. The girl gasped and asked if he'd adopted the animal. The guy said it might seem so, but actually Fem was the king of the magical wolves. Millet gaped in shock. Alfred skidded to a 10-stop, sure he'd scared the girl. Femi reached out with telepathy to introduce himself. Millet gasped, "This can't be," as the wolf spoke and the girl began to stroke them. She blurted, "That wolf is incredible." She kept pouring on flattery. Alfred relaxed. Melee was beaming. After a breakfast arranged at the King of Magical Wolves' request, Alfred strode up to the village head and vowed to tame the magical boar. Ravenous for wild boar, the villagers drove Alfred beyond his limits and swore they'd wait for him. Alfred slipped out of the village and fired a sharp question at Femi about where to go. The wolf led the boy down the path, then abruptly stopped and swelled, bursting back into his familiar, larger form. Alfred raked his fingers through the wolf's fur and grinned, "Fem's incredible after all," as the wolf's tail thumped with pride, whipping up a fierce gust. Alfred admitted he'd been haunted by it lately and couldn't shake one burning question. Was the former king of the magical wolves the very one who clashed with the heroes 3 years ago? Femi snapped that it wasn't true. The previous king had been his son. Alfred beamed and proclaimed that made Femi the grandson of the king of the magical wolves, reveling in it, but a sudden stab of pain doubled Alfred over, and Femi cried, "What is it?" He spotted Alfred clutching his leg and fired a quick question about his knee. Alfred confessed he'd been wounded in his clash with the Demon King. Femi gaped at Alfred, stunned when Alfred said he'd love it if Femi didn't slow down. Then the wolf suddenly asked the man if he wanted to ride him. The wolf stammered that he wasn't some beast for people to ride. He only stepped up because, as one of the people behind this application, he had to do something. Alfred thanked Femi hoarsely, "You're my savior," then shot onto the wolf's back, leaving Femi frozen and wide-eyed with surprise. Alfred asked, "What's wrong?" Femi forced an awkward laugh and said, "I'm fine." Then immediately they sprinted forward and Alfred realized Femi was blisteringly fast. After a while they reached their destination and Alfred snapped, "What is this place?" as a terrible wasteland stretched out before them. Alfred scoffed that no wild boars were here, yet fresh tracks stared up at them. Femi waved it off as just for now and asked Alfred, "Ready?" The wolf snapped his head up and unleashed a thunderous growl that slammed straight into the ground. Alfred slammed his palms over his ears and hissed that the racket was unbearable. Femi winced, apologized, and said he just had to wait a little while. A thunderbolt of presence struck Alfred. Someone's raw power hit him like a punch. In a heartbeat, a colossal mass tore from the earth, and Fem and Alfred stared as the wasteland heaved up, the magical boar, towering and seething with fury. Femi practically buzzed with excitement, claiming he'd known all along and that this was amazing for both of them, while the wolf crackled with energy as he jabbed at Alfred, reminding him he'd once said Femi had no chance, and the other guy burst out, stunned, asking what on earth this wolf was so happy about. The boy snapped forward in a lightning-fast lunge. Alfred's iron rule, never kill without cause. The creature towered like a living mountain, leaving the land a blasted husk after it absorbed every living thing in its territory, even her. If this keeps up, sooner or later the forest will be razed. When Alfred finally closed in on the monster, it split its maw and a vile, stomach-churning stench poured out. He plunged into a stupor, clamping his hands over his nose and face to keep from inhaling it. The smell blasted him so hard he crumpled to the ground. Fem jammed her paws over her nose, and they had no idea what it was. Alfred vaulted onto Fem's back and they tore off together as the wolf blurted, breathless and frantic, that the boar was poisonous. Its breath was deadly too. Alfred clamped his hands over his nose and snapped that Femi should have been told about this sooner. Then he shot a quick look back at the monster as guilt washed over him. Femi yelled he knew about it and swore it was true. The wolf was beaming, and Alfred, spotting that odd behavior again, asked Femi why he looked so happy. While Fem and Alfred weaved around the monster, dodging its terrifying breath, the man burned with cold certainty that such a creature couldn't be left alive. He wove a sizable magic circle and loosed it at the magical boar, convinced that even a sliver of its true power would finish the job. With the final preparation complete, Alfred erupted into a raw, roaring scream that tore the air and poured a surging tide of magic into the world. A colossal wave of magic rocketed into the monster. Instantly, blood sprayed across the area as the boar froze in its tracks. Stunned, the Feme who'd watched the whole thing locked onto the smoking cloud and asked Alfred if the guy had killed the monster, and the guy took 10 deliberate steps and snapped at the Feme to say nothing until it was necessary. After the attack, the boar collapsed behind Alfred, dead. The man straightened his clothes, bragged that killing the monster was a breeze without worrying about the surroundings, proudly declared he'd slain it with a single blow, and Alfred exhaled. He spun around as realization slammed into him. The villagers had been counting on him for wild boar meat, but Alfred would be shocked if this monster was even edible. Calmly, Femi announced the boar was edible, explaining even venomous snakes don't carry poison in their meat. Alfred's eyes shot open as he blurted, "Is that really true?" Alfred spun as a ring of wolves materialized around him, shouting in stunned amazement, while Femi merely shrugged and said, "They're my pack." Wolves swarmed and tore into the boy's body. The boy muttered they must have come for meat, and Alfred had long since noticed Femi and his pack were nothing but skin and bone. The guy ripped a small piece of meat from the dead boar. Alfred stormed up to Femi and shoved the leftovers their way, telling them to eat the rest. The wolf froze, jaw dropping, and blurted, "Alfred, are you serious?" The boy nodded and tossed the pack a booming bon appetit. The wolves answered with grateful howls to Alfred, then lunged and tore into the meat. He reveled as satisfied wolves tore into the juicy meat. Alfred executed Femi's order flawlessly. The man exploded with joy at how everything had turned out. The villagers roared with joy over the meat. Alfred stepped forward and offered to share it with everyone, and the head of the small village stood stunned, jaw dropping at the giant tusk Alfred handed him. Millet couldn't stop exclaiming how incredible it was, and the girl glowed, swept up in the joy of this wonderful day. The village kids swarmed Femi, laughing as they stroked the wolf's soft fur and squealed about how fluffy he was, and Femi soaked it in while lifting his head, clinging to his pride. Clutching a tiny plate, the girl invited Alfred to join their lunch. The man grinned ear to ear, said it sounded perfect, and promptly offered to fry up some meat for her. They pressed on. Alfred asked after Millet's little sister. The girl grinned that she was fine, thanks to Alfred, but Millet stayed tense and kept tucking her sister into bed to force more sleep. Millet burst into Colette's room, shouting that they had a guest, and Alfred trailed in right on her heels. He strode to the bed where the little girl lay and declared, smiling, that he was thrilled to meet her, and the boy blurted that he must have woken the sleeping girl. Colette raked her hands across her eyes, groggy, and croaked at Alfred, "Who are you?" She sprang to her feet and snapped, "You must be Mr. Alfred, am I right?" He froze in surprise, and Millet blurted she'd already told Colette Alfred had saved her. Millet's smile blazed as she thanked Alfred again, overflowing with gratitude for everything he'd done for her and the village. Then she faced Colette and ordered her to stay in bed until the food was ready. The girl nodded. Alfred threw his support behind Millet, warning Colette couldn't risk falling ill again. The girl affirmed it. From the kitchen, Millet called out she'd call them when everything was ready. Out of nowhere, the beaming girl spotted Femi, gushed at how adorable the creature was, and immediately plunged her hand into the wolf's velvety fur. Colette beamed, declaring Femi huge and cloud-soft, while the wolf settled obediently at her side, calm and content. She spun to Alfred, eyes shining, and thanked him from the bottom of her heart for coming to visit them. Alfred beamed and said he was truly glad to have met sweet Colette. She threw her head back and laughed, nodding fiercely at Alfred's words. She turned to the boy, leaned in and asked to whisper in his ear. He blinked, a little surprised, then stepped forward toward her. In that instant, Colette planted a bold kiss on the guy's cheek. She laughed, declaring this was her gratitude for Alfred. The boy recoiled, pressed a hand to his cheek and thanked Colette, while Femi's suspicious eyes stayed locked on his master. He flopped down on the floor beside her bed. Colette leaned in and asked, "What do you think of my little sister?" And Alfred froze, totally blindsided. The question snagged him. Colette had proclaimed with fierce certainty that Melee's sister was an amazing girl, and Alfred couldn't deny it. She gushed that Malice's cooking blew her away, and hailed the girl as impossibly kind and a master of every task, washing included. Colette revealed that when their father died, Melee plunged into medicine and became a doctor to care for her sister. She declared a swarm of guys were lining up to marry Millet. Alfred chuckled that she must be popular. Colette nodded, eyes sparkling, and blurted, "Do you like Millet?" The boy froze, admitting he'd never pictured her like that and couldn't find the words. Then Colette suddenly burst out, certain her little sister liked Alfred. She meant Millet melted into syrupy charm every time he talked to Alfred. She smiled, declaring that's exactly why she wanted Alfred to marry Millet. Colette urged that, even if he couldn't decide right now, he had to think it over. Colette swore it would stay their secret. Alfred sealed the promise with a nod, and Millet strode into the room to announce everything was ready. The girl leaned in, curiosity buzzing. "What are you talking about?" Colette brushed it off. "We're not talking about anything," then pulled Millet into a tight hug. The girl pressed, "Does your little sister know what I'm asking?" And Colette laughed. Towards evening, the 8 of them jammed around the table. Alfred tasted a bite and declared it very tasty. Millet flashed a grateful grin, thanked him for the praise, and declared this dinner existed only because of Alfred. Colette piped up, "Was that wild boar really as big as a bull?" And Alfred declared it wasn't, it was colossal, dwarfing a bull and towering over the house, while Colette gushed about how amazing Alfred was. The guy grinned and said that if Colette had been there, he'd have even handed her the security guard job. Worry carved into Millet's face as the girl said animal damage had definitely increased, added that she'd never heard of a boar this huge, and admitted the news terrified her. Femi grinned and declared Alfred had already crushed the colossal enchanted boar for them. He vowed they'd hunt down the remaining monsters and make sure none of them ever hurt another human. Colette swept Fem into a tight hug and insisted, again, that he was amazing. Millet burst out that the girl hadn't finished her food yet, then declared, brimming with confidence, that everything would be fine. She swore Alfred would shield them and that Femi would help too. A grin split his face. He vowed, his voice like steel, that they could rely on them. The enchanted wolves and the cursed boar lie broken, their threat to the village snuffed out. The next day Alfred made for the hot springs to unwind, but the hulking image of that enormous wild boar clung to his mind and gnawed a cold knot of worry into the boy. A cavernous yawn tore from Alfred, dragging tears to his eyes. The exhausted boy sat on a chair, anchoring the village while Femi slept beside him. He'd chosen the cushy life as a guard, and when the area stayed threat-free, free time piled up until it buried him. The guy laughed at Femi and taunted that even the king of the magical wolves had relaxed. Femi's eyes snapped open, and scowling, he snapped that he hadn't been asleep at all. At the forest's edge, a colossal enchanted boar reared up, so monstrous it put the king of the magical wolves to shame. If the boar had drifted in from somewhere else, rumors would spread like wildfire. He asked if some dark magic or curse was making magical beasts swell into monstrous sizes. Night slammed down while Alfred and Femi slept peacefully in their house. The wolf's instincts screamed danger. He sprang to his paws, yanking the boy awake and barking, "Someone's coming for the village." Alfred blinked, stunned, and whispered, "I didn't feel anything." Something slammed into his head. He shot upright from the bed. He told Femi he'd expected nothing less from the wolf. His perception outstripped everyone else's, and Alfred wondered who it was this time. With Fem at his side, Alfred strode into the street, unnerved. He felt no urge to kill, yet everything about the scene felt wrong, and he couldn't fathom why anyone would wander this remote area in the middle of the night. Suddenly heels clicked. The boy spun, eyes wide, as a girl stepped right in front of the guy and shouted that it really was Alfred, leaving the guy stunned. He asked who she was. She erupted, furious he'd forgotten her, arms folded. She snapped his forgetfulness was unforgivable and declared, "I'm Vivi, one of the Demon King's 4 heavenly kings." Alfred's jaw dropped as he stared at the proud girl. He still had no idea who she was, and he told himself that even if her words were true, his memory stayed blank. Alfred scoffed that if she was one of the Demon King's army's 4 heavenly kings, the hero team should have already crushed them all. She shot back that there were actually 5. Alfred demanded, "Is this real?" His voice raw with disbelief as every instinct screamed that something didn't add up. He realized she was a demon, a plain, run-of-the-mill one, yet she swaggered as if she were one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King's army. Alfred's eyes drilled into the girl with cold suspicion as he demanded, "Why are you out in a place like this?" Vivi snapped back, heat in her voice, "What are you staring at?" She snarled that he was only pretending not to know what he'd done, and Alfred's irritation flared as the girl's furious glare put him on edge. The guy raked a hand through his hair and blurted, "Did I do something?" Rage boiled in Vivi as she echoed his words, then she roared that this was not just something. Sobbing, she screamed that she had raised and educated her boar, and Alfred had coldly killed it. She couldn't fathom how the boy dared act like that. Alfred froze, staring at the girl, shock plastered on his face, and Vivi snapped, "Don't you even dare say you forgot it." Rage exploded from Alfred as he jabbed a finger at the girl and spat that it was all her fault. Vivi froze, the accusation hitting her like a blow. She gasped, insisting she had every right to be furious. Alfred erupted, bellowing for her to shut up. By enlarging this boar, she'd shattered the ecosystem and left everyone in danger. She let out a long, bitter sigh, thrust her spell-wreathed hand forward, and shouted that she no longer had to concern herself with ordinary people's problems. Alfred would now vanish from the face of the earth. He tensed and threw his hands up to shield himself the instant he caught Vivi casting a spell, slapping a hand over his eyes, and sure the demon would do nothing less. He gaped as Vivi's magic erupted into a colossal, thunderous force. Alfred snorted. Only a fool would recite a long spell right in front of the enemy. The boy barreled straight at Vivi, who stood statue, still reciting the spell. He erupted into a raw scream, and the girl, seeing it, staggered back, stunned and utterly bewildered. Alfred barreled into Vivi, sending her tumbling clean off her feet. She was flung backward and slammed into the dirt, sobbing, "Why did you do that?" And absolutely sure Alfred was a wizard, while he said coolly, "Breaking spells is the basis of the basics." He slammed into Vivi, sneering she had the nerve to show her face after causing so much trouble for ordinary people, vowed to knock some sense into her. The girl screamed in pure terror. Alfred slammed to a stop as Vivi's scream erupted, her emotions igniting into a roaring fireball. Alfred dove aside and barely escaped the blast, shock etched across his face. A roaring fireball screamed past Alfred's back and slammed straight into the boy's hut. Alfred screamed, clueless about what it was, and lunged to snuff the flames with his fire magic. After he obliterated the danger, he whirled to Vivi, menace crackling in his voice, and snarled, "Don't even think I can let you go so easily after this." She tried to say it wasn't on purpose, but in that instant Femi snatched her by the ankle and rattled the demons side to side. Alfred's eyes locked on Femi as he unleashed himself, refusing to hold back even with the girls crying. A boy gasped, awestruck, "The king of magical wolves never fails to amaze me," and Vivi, stunned, demanded, "Why are you praising Femi?" Femi whipped Vivian around like a ragdoll, while the girls screamed at the wolf to stop. Kamlai watched it all, and Alfred asked if she even realized her mistake. Vivi's scream tore through the air as she shouted she understood everything. Only after that Alfred told the wolf to stop, and no sooner had he spoken than Femi, with icy calm, threw the girl to the ground. Vivi pressed trembling palms to the earth. All she could think was how terrifying it was. Alfred shouted for her to stretch her hands toward him. Vivi snapped to attention and followed the boy's command. Barely a heartbeat later, Alfred unleashed a spell, clamping glowing manacles onto the demon's hands and locking down her movements. He clamped a hand over her eyes and dragged her into the barn, then flung her to the back of the room as Vivi cried, "What are you planning to do with me? Why bring me to this barn?" She clawed across the floor, fury crackling, as she screamed that he could use her body, but he'd never take her heart. Alfred watched her in stunned silence, then his gaze snapped to the massive gaping hole the fireball had torn in the ceiling. He blurted that everything was visible from here. Vivi misunderstood, snapped, "What are you looking at?" Sure, he was staring where he shouldn't be, and she asked him to stop. She snarled that, as one of the Demon King's 4 heavenly kings, being humiliated and treated like a second-class nobody was unforgivable. Vivi refused to back down, swearing she wouldn't lose. Femi scoffed, calling her a weirdo. They watched her in silence as Vivi lived in her own little world. Alfred let out a heavy, exasperated sigh at how troublesome Vivi was, peeled the blindfold from her eyes, and vowed he had absolutely no intention of doing anything like that to her. Vivi snapped, yelling that he was deceiving her. She barked at him not to touch her. The guy reached out to calm her, but she writhed with restless energy. When Alfred's patience snapped, he sighed and told Vivi to do whatever she wanted, but the roof she'd set ablaze still needed repairing. He thought this was the crucial moment. He had to interrogate her mercilessly to drag the girl's motives into the open. Vivi lay on the floor, bound. The boy glared at her and demanded why she'd widened the magical bore. She shot back that she had no reason to tell Alfred about it. She threw back her head and laughed, taunting that if he ever learned her plans, he'd be utterly horrified. Alfred said nothing. Vivi's cruel smile widened as she declared the magical boar's enlargement was mere training. The girl smirked that she was setting her sights on a dragon for later, and when it grew, the enchanted boars would be perfect food for it. She said it would be a double boon for her. Alfred and Femi dismissed Vivi as dim because she blurted everything out without a second thought. The guy saw it as a huge disappointment, watching her flail like a child who couldn't control herself. He shrugged it off. She's probably just a kid, but the girl's plan still sent a small chill through Alfred. If she can swell the dragon into a colossus, we're staring down catastrophe. Alfred barreled up to Vivi and demanded, "What will you do after you enlarge the monster?" He lunged the question, "Are you rebuilding the Demon King's army?" Vivi's voice chilled with suspicion as she snapped, "How do you know that?" Alfred snapped, "What kind of spell did Vivi use? No normal magic could make her grow to that size." He averted his gaze and called it an impressive magical boar, then peered through his fingers at Vivi, who genuinely beamed at the praise. She laughed, sneering, and mocked that for a lowly creature Alfred was surprisingly skilled. The boy rolled his eyes. He thought it was too easy. Vivi whipped a glowing magic circle onto the swamp floor and thrust it at Alfred. He gaped, asking if she'd really carved it into the bottom of the swamp, and she beamed, "I outdid myself." Alfred's pulse spiked. If he had uncovered the spell, it had been buried with cunning, and that pesky girl was way more powerful than he'd given her credit for. The boy sprang upright and vowed they'd cleanse the magic circles tomorrow. Vivi's jaw dropped. Alfred barked that once they finished, the girl would fix the roof. Vivi snapped, "Why me?" And when Femi unleashed a low, menacing growl at her, she flinched and nodded her agreement. Alfred beamed, said, "I'm glad," and wished her good night. The next morning, the boy burst into the village and spilled every secret of the night, leaving the villagers pale and frozen with shock. Alfred snarled that everything was fine and swore he'd sort it out soon so everyone would be safe. The villagers roared that the boy had snared a dragon brimming with raw arcane power, and it had saved them, and they swore the village would have been raised without Alfred. They all burst into thanks, declaring him the village's savior. Alfred protested he hadn't done much, and Millet snapped that the claim was dead wrong. The boy's grin lit up the moment he spotted the girl, and right then little Vivi shrieked that she was one of the army's 4 heavenly kings. The village kids swarmed the girl, awestruck and clamoring to know who the 4 heavenly kings were, and Millet blurted out, "Is Vivi really a powerful demon?" Alfred declared he'd slammed a limiter onto her so she'd be fine. Millet's voice trembled as she asked whether the boy had been hurt fighting that demon. Alfred told her not to worry. Millet beamed, calling Alfred a towering marvel of strength and awe. Alfred laughed it off, denying it and saying no. Vivi had slapped on the title of self-proclaimed Sky King. Millet flashed a smile and insisted that even if that were true, it didn't change that Alfred had defended their village. She was grateful to him. Alfred beamed, firing a grateful, "Thank you, Millet," straight at her. A rush of color seized her cheeks. When he thanked her, Alfred was convinced she was genuinely happy. Alfred, Vivi and Femi at his side, charged into his journey. The guild leader spun to the boy and asked if Alfred could take Millet along as an observer. The boy blurted yes before thought could catch up. Alfred swallowed hard. The village chief's order left him no choice. Millet dropped into a deep bow, admitted her inexperience, and pleaded for him to take care of her. Alfred agreed and strode forward beside him, insisting it wouldn't be dangerous but swearing he'd protect Millet if danger struck. Vivi let out a heavy sigh as she listened, and the villagers quietly wished the boy success. Alfred clung atop Femi, Millet sitting beside him, as the girl gushed that Femi looked adorable and then turned to the others to ask what they thought. Vivi locked eyes with the wolf, and terror ripped through her. To her, Femi was a terrifying monster. She forced herself forward, muttering about how terrible it all was. A cold certainty told her Fem would pounce on any chance to devour her. Terror clenched her like a fist. Alfred barked, "What nonsense is that girl spouting?" Vivi halted mid-step and declared they'd reached their destination, and Alfred leaped off Femi. Millet clapped a hand over her nose and hissed that it reeked, and Alfred grimaced in agreement. The girl gasped, eyes wide, that Alfred and Femi had felled the magical boar spewing that foul poison, and Alfred agreed, still pinching his nose. Even Femi gagged at the rancid stench and shot Alfred a pitying look that screamed he couldn't cover his own nose, so Alfred swallowed, knew he had no choice, and slammed his hand over the wolf's nose. Vivi spun around, nostrils burning, and demanded their verdict. The thing smelled awful. The girl finished her hunt by uncovering a rare poisonous boar and binding it to magic circles, while Alfred listened with barely concealed boredom. Alfred edged up to the liquid and declared the swamp was visibly shrinking. Then Millet called out to him, yanking Alfred's attention in an instant. She jabbed a finger at a hulking lobster she'd spotted in the swamp, and Alfred snorted that it looked like a crayfish, just absurdly huge. Alfred's skin prickled. He spun and saw a tree sparrow barely smaller than Femi, then demanded whether this was the effect of the magic circles. Vivi purred contentedly, asking if he finally understood everything, then explained that the magic the circles had funneled into the boar was now spilling out and racing through the entire area. She was about to explain her plan when Alfred cut her off like a lightning strike, snarling that if this chaos came from her magic, they had every reason to put an end to it, and he ordered her to hurry up and kill the monsters. The guy hurled a bucket at her and ordered her to scoop every last speck of dirt out with it. Vivi grabbed it and scoffed that it was stupid, and Alfred snapped that it was her responsibility. She'd drawn them, so now she had to remove them. Rage burst from the girl as she berated Alfred, calling his demand disrespectful and declaring she couldn't believe he expected her to scoop up the dirt. Right then Femi's deep growl rolled from behind Vivi, and Vivi replied that she understood. She plunged her hands into the swamp muck, scooping up heavy clods and grumbling about why she had to do it, and Millet watched, pity prickling at her chest. Alfred declared Millet far too kind. The girl gaped at the words. Alfred insisted Vivi was only reaping what she'd earned. One careless move and the whole village would be annihilated, but at this pace she'd never finish clearing the dirt, and he flat-out refused to harass her. Alfred leaned in and said there was another way. Vivi's jaw dropped as he shot his hands up, painting the air with dozens of glowing magic circles and insisting that wizards should use magic. Gusts tore through the air as Millet dug her heels in, fighting to stay grounded while a spell wrapped around her and tugged at her will. Vivi watched dazed as Alfred plotted to whip every scrap of dirt together with wind magic and at the same instant bend gravity so it hovered. The next moment a towering hurricane surged over the boys, heaving a choking torrent of swamp mud, and Millet stood wide-eyed, utterly captivated by the magical sight. Vivi stood equally stunned as Alfred bellowed, "What are you doing?" then barked at the girl to rip down the magic circles. Vivi agreed without hesitation. Alfred snarled that if she pulled any stunt he'd dump every scrap of dirt on her, and Vivi snapped she'd already said she'd do it. Alfred's gaze pinned Vivi as she dutifully erased every magic circle. After a while, Vivi hauled herself to her feet and declared she was done with everything, and Alfred heard her, nodded, and said the girl had done a good job. He eased his hands down, the mud slurped back into the swamp, and with that their work was done. Vivi whipped around and screamed that only a demon king could wield gravity magic, let alone master two different attributes at once. She screamed that the slightest loss of control could make the spell erupt on its own, and Alfred grinned, saying 2 elements were no problem. He could unleash 4 at once if he had to. Shock slammed into Vivi, and she shot back, "Alfred, are you making fun of me?" The man snapped, "Do I look like I need it?" Vivi's silence snapped, and she screamed that even if he was telling the truth, it was near impossible. Demons with titanic magic could only use them for at most a single minute. Alfred smirked, shot back that she'd clearly underestimated him. He could last a full hour, and the words shut Vivi up cold. Alfred and Melee leaped back onto Fem, the boy barking they were heading back, and Vivi stared at them, realizing a lowly creature was the very thing terrifying her. Beaming, Millet cradled a gigantic crayfish to her chest and cried, "This magic is incredible." Alfred smirked and proclaimed Millet could do anything with it. The girl kept gushing that the crayfish was huge and looked delicious. Alfred scoffed, convinced it was inedible. Vivi scowled, furious at being plastered in dirt, and then Millet's eyes flashed. He had an idea. She tossed out that they should hit the bathhouse when they got back. The girl instantly flushed and blurted she meant separate bathhouses. Alfred, thinking he'd come to Merg village partly for the hot springs, snapped up Melee's offer without hesitation as the girl kept choking out apologies. After vowing to Melee and her little sister, Colette, he'd be back for dinner and stepping away, the village chief stopped him and gushed about 2 amazing bathhouses. Alfred hung on the village chief's words, curiosity igniting, so he raced to the spot the chief named, and when he arrived, he breathed a stunned, reverent sigh as the place's beauty unfolded before him. The boy pressed his face to the fence and peered at the bathhouse with Fem as Alfred marveled, a whole bathhouse just for them. The village chief boomed that steaming hot springs speckled the outskirts, so Alfred could safely soak in any of them. Alfred and Femi erupted with relief. This permission was everything Alfred had ever dared to hope for. He yanked off his jacket, told Femi he'd head inside and leave the wolf waiting outside, then promised he'd wash Femi out there later. The wolf gaped, genuine amazement written across his face, while Femi fixed Alfred with a single pleading glance that begged him to take him along. Alfred couldn't contain himself. The guy swept Femi into a hug and agreed, warning the wolf not to fuss or get anything dirty. Femi bristled and snapped he'd never do such a thing. Alfred stripped off his clothes, and they burst into the bathhouse wing. He grinned widely as he announced this would be his first bath in ages, and Femi mirrored his excitement with an electric grin. Femi lunged for the bath, but Alfred yanked him back and barked that the wolf would only enter the pool after you washed yourself. Femi froze and snapped that he knew. Alfred sloshed soap and water over himself, then did the same to a thoroughly grumpy Femi. The boy sprang into action, scrubbing Femi first while the wolf reveled in the mess. After a quick wash, they plunged into the hot water and melted into relaxation, both exhaling in relief as the heat hit them exactly where they needed it. Alfred yelped that hot water was seeping into his knee. Femi stared, puzzled, and said he really didn't understand what the guy was talking about. Alfred locked eyes with Femi and asked if his guess that dogs hate bats was right. Femi snapped that he wasn't a dog, so there was no problem. Alfred affirmed he believed it. He sank a fraction deeper into the steaming water, drew a long, steady breath, and let every stray thought slip away, then sighed, summer or not, these baths were still simply incredible. Sensing Alfred was overheating in the water, he sprang up and declared he was getting out. The water had left the boy dizzy, and Femi whined, begging him to sit in the water a little longer. As Alfred sprinted toward the exit, a female voice sliced through the air. Demons don't need any swimsuits. The girl spat no with filth clinging to her. That demon has to be filthy. The demon snarled, I'm not like them. I'm above those lowly beings. Millet Vidiankelet barreled into the bathhouse. The Vidiankelet stood naked as a demon shrieked that she did not smell. The girls slipped deeper into the steaming bathhouse. Alfred and Femi flattened themselves behind a rock as the girls chattered nervously that this was their first time here. Femi glared at his master and demanded why the boy was hiding. Alfred whispered, steady and proud, he had principles. The girls' argument exploded, their voices slicing the air as Femi watched in tense silence and Alfred spun away, jaw tight, forcing himself to believe he hadn't heard a single word. Millet wouldn't quit, nagging Vivi that this was their one chance to finally wash their hair properly, so Vivi clapped her hands over her ears and screeched that she hated bathhouses. Little Colette declared she was already washing. Foam crowned her head. Vivi's eyes narrowed at Millet, and she fired off a remark that mattered far more to her. The demon reached out to Millet and said, even though she's an elf, her form is surprisingly good, leaving Millet frozen, utterly stunned by her move. Vivi barreled into Millet and wrenched the towel away. Millet screamed, scrambling to cover herself and shouting it should be hidden beneath her clothes. Vivi stepped up behind Millet and began touching her. Millet's cheeks burst crimson, utterly mortified as she fumbled to tell Vivi something. She suddenly shouted that the truth was about to boil over with anger, but Vivi didn't stop for a second. Colette told the Sky King that no matter how hard she massaged her little sister, nothing would be lost. Alfred clamped his hands over his face and stared at the floor, fighting every nerve to force himself, never, under any circumstances, to look, clutching the stubborn belief that he had to be a gentleman. Fem's voice wobbled with worry. The guy's face had gone betrayed. Alfred snapped back, ripping his hands from his face as sweat sluiced off him, and he wondered if dizziness was hitting him while his vision swam. Colette darted behind the rock where Femi and Alfred were hiding and yelled that Mr. was here with Femi. Millet slapped her hands over herself, stunned, and Vivi didn't hang back. She clutched her robe, rage crackling as she accused him of spying on the poor girls in the bathhouse, and snarled that he must want to die. Called froze, bewildered, as all three girls charged straight up to Alfred, and the guy flailed to justify himself, begging them to wait. It was a complete misunderstanding. Vivi refused to listen. She launched a bucket at his head with every ounce of strength and spat, "You're a disgusting wizard." Vivi's blow smashed into him, hurling Alfred backward until the world went black. Millet's terrified scream was the last thing he heard, then his memories melted into a murky blur. She jabbed at her phone to call him, and after a long wait Alfred's eyes finally cracked open, exhaustion etched on his face. Right in front of him, Millet's smile blossomed the instant she realized he was awake. He sprang upright, clawing himself into a sitting position, while Vivi beside him spat that he was useless and sneered, "You nasty creature." The boy rubbed his head as memories stabbed back. a brutal wave of dizziness that plunged him into blackness, and Vivi suddenly hurling a bucket at him. He drew a long breath, forced a smile, and flinched at the sickening truth, humiliating and utterly pathetic for an S-class wizard. The boy bowed, eyes bright with gratitude, promising he owed them a favor. Millet just grinned and waved it off. "You don't owe us a thing," and Vivi frowned, unsettled because she could have sworn the bathhouse had been reserved for them. Alfred snapped that it wasn't true. The village chief himself had recommended the place, and he was dead certain the bathhouse was reserved for him. Vivi's expression hardened into a frown. Colette barreled into the room astride Femi and demanded, "Is the master any better?" Millet shot back that the village chief had relayed that exact same message through Colette, and Colette whirled to her sister, demanding whether it was true. She grinned ear to ear and blurted she'd heard it straight from the village chief, and the man urged the mister to try the hot springs, saying Colette and the others could go after the boy. Vivi and Millet erupted, insisting the girl had said the exact opposite. Earlier Colette had screamed that the village chief had okayed a trip to the baths, and she'd been desperate to go, so the girl stood there utterly confused. Millet's cheeks flared crimson as she stammered that it had all been a misunderstanding and apologized desperately, and little Colette screamed that she was very sorry. Alfred snapped awake, shocked to be fully dressed with no memory of changing, and Millie yanked him by the shoulders, demanding to know what condition he was in. The girl sprang up, shouting she'd fetch him water at once. Alfred nodded and thanked her for her care. Millet grinned ear to ear and proclaimed the springs pulsed with enchantment from mystical minerals. No wonder wizards got drunk so easily, and Alfred filed that away in his head. Colette barreled over to Alfred, shouting his name again and again, and the guy snapped, "What happened?" Colette slid close to the boy's ear and hissed that her little sister Melee had dressed him. She grinned, satisfied, eyes locked on Alfred. The guy dropped his head even lower and muttered that it seems he's now in great debt to Millet, and Femi just barked. After finishing the day's business at the bathhouse, Alfred pushed out with Femi into a lively wind, shielded his face with his hand, certain everyone had already gone home. Then little Colette called his name and snapped for him to hurry. They surged forward together, the wind whipping their hair and pretty dresses, and Millet spun to wave at him, grinning that whoever arrived last would have to go without dinner. At those words, Vivian Colette blasted forward at full speed. Millet called out that she actually still had to cook it, so Alfred didn't have to rush too much, and the girls smiled widely. Vivi suddenly crashed to the ground and cried it out. Millet snapped that it was all because she'd rushed, and Alfred exploded with giddy laughter, slapping a hand over his mouth as he laughed. Colette pressed herself against Melee's legs, arms locked around her sister as Vivi watched, and Alfred confessed that dedicating his life to protecting these beautiful people wasn't as grim as he'd feared. Alfred Lint stands as an S-rank wizard, and he spent 5 relentless days serving as a guard in Merg village. He drove back the beasts and finally exhaled. Then the true culprit stepped from the shadows, the demon girl, self-proclaimed as one of Demon King Vivi's 4 heavenly kings. She schemed to swell the boars and summon dragons with mighty magic to resurrect the Demon King's army, but he smashed that plan to pieces. The kids erupted, howling that the Sky King was the coolest thing ever. Alfred sneered, labeling her a scoundrel and a tad dim, and now she was his charge. Alfred wrestled with asking the elder about re-education, then resolved to leave her in their care for now. In the end, she's not an enemy the village can stand against, and he still owes an apology. Alfred concedes the point, insisting that even if she's no ordinary demon, she's a demon all the same. If they shrug her off and set her loose, nobody can predict the havoc she'll wreak. He asks why not turn her over to the Lord, and the man shoots back that he'd considered it, but the Lord hates all demons. If they don't move, she'll face execution. Alfred swallowed and owned that he knew everything and how cruel he'd been. The man grips the boy, thanks him, and vows the whole village will rally to help. Alfred forces a jittery smile and declares he'll take advantage of her, making her work for the good of the village. After some time, the young man barreled onto the construction site and bellowed to Vivi that at this rate she wouldn't see lunch. Suddenly, Vivi slams the hammer down on his finger. She shrieked, "Why would I do something like that?" Sitting on Alfred's porch, and the young man shot back, "Because you burned my roof." She snaps that she's got her own work and is leaving, and Alfred demands, "Do you have any patience?" She snaps there's no time for patience, but vows to watch the village cattle. Millet throws herself into every task she can, and the young man remarks that the girl is clearly working hard. The girl bolts up to Alfred and blurts she'd always pictured her little sister as the perfect wife. Alfred nods and realizes he's not opposed to the idea. She shrugged off helping him and watching over Vivi as nothing but duty. He knew that if Millet gave it even a single thought, she'd never love an old man like him. Millet admits she's been thinking about it, but if they unleash Vivi's magic circles, can they conjure a mountain of meat? Alfred snaps, exactly, these cattle are ordinary animals, not magical beasts, and Millet blurts, was the crab a magical creature? Alfred snaps, if you actually think it through, it's possible. Vivi, overhearing, pipes up, anything with circles is easy for me. Millet smirks, I knew that. The young man vows they'll come that afternoon to try to do it, and Millet thanks him with a smile, saying she'll wait. Vivi roared that he had no right to decide everything. He was a lesser being. The boy snapped that the girl had said she could do it all, and Vivi hissed she never said she'd do it. Vivi snaps that she's one of the Demon King's 4 heavenly kings, a peerless being who demands to be served, and scorns the young man as a brazen fool for daring to make her do chores. The boy glares at the girl with icy contempt, storms over and hauls her away, while Vivi yells that it's perfect and thinks a short walk won't hurt. After a while the roof stood fully repaired. Alfred admitted a few rough spots but couldn't hide his awe that she'd done it all herself. It was superb work, and Vivi wiped sweat from her brow, shrugging that it was natural. Alfred insists that after a short rest they'll head to the farm. Vivi snaps she won't go. Then Millet shows up saying she was waiting, and somehow a cow outlived them and let out a single startling moo. Millet laughs and declares they're ready anytime. Vivi's scream rips the air at the cow's monstrous size. Alfred orders Vivi to hurry and start circling. Vivi seethed at being forced to do this for someone she saw as beneath her. Exhaustion gnawed at her, and the tasks felt brutal, so she folded her arms across her chest. Alfred swore he could make Fem growl at her, but that move was impossible. If the girl couldn't, there was nothing he could do. His job was done, and Vivi shot back that she'd never said she couldn't. Alfred gritted his teeth and said he figured Vivi's power should make growing the herds easier, but it's not that simple. Vivi rolled her eyes and snapped that it's obvious, it's easy. Alfred spun away, declaring it was too much for the girl. Vivi shot back they could handle it no problem. The boy waved it off, saying everything was fine and he wouldn't force him. Using too much magic chews you up, especially if you're an inexperienced wizard, and the young man smirked right then. Rage lit Vivi up as she dared him to underestimate her and just stand there and watch. Millet cowered before her, then shoved the girl and snapped for her to go to the free pasture. Alfred's grin widens. He can tell Vivi's impossibly easy to rile. Vivi, in that instant, locks onto the concentric rings that form magic circles, because that's their very core. The girl proclaims experience is crucial, even for the simplest actions. Alfred scoffs that Vivi talks a lot. Millet smiles and says she wants to see how his magic works. Alfred's grin cracks wide as he locks eyes with Millet and nods. Vivi drops to the ground, channels her magic, and a glowing magic seal bursts into being beneath them. Vivi flashes a grin and declares, everything's ready. Alfred grinned and declared she always nailed it, just as he'd expected. Vivi shot back that she doubled the circle's size. Millet plants a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, turns to Vivi and declares she's incredible. Vivi lights up, thanks him for his help, and insists she poured her whole self into it. A shout shatters the air. Millet snaps to Alfred that her break's over and that's bad because she has to get back to work, and Alfred demands, then why don't we help the girl? So they really can't just leave. Femi erupts into a fierce, confirming bark. Millet thundered he was God-sent, and Vivi, staring at the brutal weight, warned them not to overexert themselves. Millet barked, loosen and fluff the straw for feeding, feed them until their bellies are full, and shower them with love. Millet grins and says the cow's happy. Vivi nervously asks, really? The girl studies the utterly content cow and asks again, is she really happy? And Vivi flushes bright with embarrassment. Millet exploded with gratitude, thanking everyone. Their work had just wiped hours off their schedule. Fresh from the bath, Vivi declared she was starving and summoned the lower being. Alfred scoffed at cooking, too stressful, and boomed, perfect, jerky for everyone. Vivi screams that the boy forced her to eat jerky for dinner, disbelief clawing at her voice, and Alfred flushes with embarrassment as he snaps at the girl to stop laughing at the jerky. Right then Millet storms into the room, drops a quick apology for the wait, flashes a smile, and declares she's brought dinner. Millet burst into the room and cried, isn't it great? Vivi charged forward and snarled that she's quite a skilled lower being. Then Femi sidled up to the girl and buried his nose in the food. Vivi giggles and urges the boy to keep devouring his jerky. Millet cuts in, grinning as she announces she's got some for Al too. Millet spreads the food across the table, doles out everyone's portion, and beams as they wish them a pleasant appetite. A steaming plate sat before the boy. Al raved that it was beef stew from the village of Merg and absolutely delicious. Then he thanked the girl for bringing food every day, and Millet smiled, calling it simply her hobby. Vivi beamed and gleefully cried for more lavishing kindness on Millet, while the girl shouted that the Sky King was absolutely awesome. Millet jabbed a finger at Owl's overflowing plate and asked what to do since she has so much left. The young man grinned, leapt in for a second helping, and declared it delicious. He crushes a good job and devours delicious food every day, then lights up the night having a blast with his friends. With dinner done, the boys attacked the sink and scrubbed every dish, and Alfred declared that ordinary life is what truly makes him happy. The girls slipped away, shouting, "See you tomorrow," to the young man. Alfred looms and declares to Femi it's bedtime, and in a blink Femi slips between Al's legs and dives into the sheets. Al pictures the bed smothered in hair, but he doesn't care anymore. Suddenly Vivi snaps, "Where's my bed?" Alfred smirks and throws back. Who knows, maybe it'll appear when the girl makes it. And Vivi smirks, firing back that he never even bothered to think about it. They snap their gaze to the bed. Vivi's leg jolts, and in a heartbeat Vivi and Alfred scramble for it. Femi is already lying there. Alfred dove onto the bed first, laughter exploding as he declared it his, while Vivi sat on the floor, bellowing at the young man to know his place. She hauls Alfred out of bed, collapses into his spot, and snaps for him to sleep in the barn. Stunned, he stammers whether she really wants him to take things seriously. After a while, the young man leaned in and tossed out a bold deal. He'd share the bed and let her claim the spot against the wall. Vivi snapped that nothing could be done and warned the boy not to do anything reckless. He asked what the other would think of someone like Vivi, and they both said good night. Morning burst in. Alfred yelped and began whining as something tickled his face, Femi's tail. The tail tickled Vivi's nose. The pact snapped. Alfred curled up on the very edge as Vivi pressed herself against him, and Femi hogged every pillow. Vivi's seal suddenly roared to life in the cow stall. Millet and Vivi fought to keep the cows fed and healthy, while Femi kept a relentless watch over Vivi, tending wild animals and punching the clock on his guard duties day after day. Perched on a tiny folding chair, the boy's face lit when Millet set a new chair beside him. He thanked the girl, then a passing farmer stopped to tell Alfred he was doing his job very well, and the boy thanked the man. Finally, the boy snagged a breather and flopped down to spare his aching knee. Then a scream ripped the air, yanking his name, Alfred. The village chief barreled up. The young man demanded what had happened, and the chief screamed that the cow had ballooned into monstrous proportions. Alfred declared it made perfect sense. They'd set up the magic circles for exactly this. The other man blasted back that they didn't have to be that huge, and suddenly a deep, wrenching moan tore through the air. The man and the boy clutched their heads and sprinted to the place. The boy gasped, "Is it really that big?" And the man barked to Alfred, "Follow me, it's massive." They hurtled forward at breakneck speed, screaming for the village chief to calm down. A cow's silhouette loomed, and the young man's heart sank. He knew it spelled disaster. The men yelled for Millet to abandon the cows. "Come back now, and be careful." Alfred snapped at him not to do anything stupid. Millet shouted to the boy that the cow had suddenly ballooned in size. Alfred demanded, "What is this? Those circles shouldn't be doing that." Vivi smirked and revealed she'd spent the last 3 days tending cows while secretly upgrading the magic circles. She laughs tauntingly, laying out the havoc she'll unleash once she gets down to business. Alfred snaps at the girl, "Ever heard of restraint?" And Fem cuts in, urgently asking what they should do. Alfred snaps that if Femi's asking about this, she should seek out the village elder. At that moment, the man brooded over something. The man snarls they'll probably have to butcher her. Alfred snaps, "Are you sure?" And the man spits that before that they were going to sell her next month. They can try dragging her alive to the city. Keeping her breathing the whole trip will drain them. Butcher her for meat, and it will rot before they arrive. Drying her into jerky would still be a nightmare because she's so massive. Alfred vows that after they butcher her, he'll seal her with magic to preserve her. The chief snarls for proof, and Alfred proclaims the boy their savior. Right then, memory slammed into Vivi, brushing this cow, crafting seals with her, feeding her, and terror seized the girl. The boy steeled himself to destroy the cow when Vivi's voice cracked through the air, begging him to wait. He forced out a trembling apology. "I'm very sorry, but they had no choice." She slammed herself between the boy and the cow and yelled, "Stop, Muffy did nothing wrong." Alfred's jaw dropped when he heard Vivi call the cow Muffy. At that exact moment, Millet yelled that her name was 8, and Alfred realized Vivi had already picked a far more fitting nickname. She screamed, forcing him to meet her bewitching eyes and demanding, "Are you really going to kill me?" Alfred answers coldly, "Yes." Vivi explodes in fury, shouting that it's cruel. She snaps, "Are you really going to devour my meat later?" Alfred proclaims it with iron conviction. When he says it's true, he means it. Livy shot him a puzzled look. Why would he say that when Muffy was a special cow? Alfred strides up to the girl, warning that her colossal size will make eating a nightmare, and if she starts rolling through the streets, she'll demolish half the village. A knife twist of sorrow hits Muffy and the villagers as Millet strides up and coldly tells the girl they'd been raising her for meat and were about to sell her off soon. She insists Vivi isn't to blame. The girl sprints to the cow, drops to her knees and screams she's so sorry. She made the cow grow that big. Alfred steps forward. Don't blame her, I told her to do it. Vivi pleads for the boy to make it painless. The boy replies, trust me. He catapults into the air and slams down, landing squarely above Muffy's head. The young man pictures himself ramming a magic spear straight through her brain. In a heartbeat, Muffy collapses, every spark gone. Moments later, the young man gives a cold nod and lets the villagers drain her blood and cut the body up. He blasted the ground with explosive magic, ripping out a storage pit, then slammed storage magic into the spot and instantly turned the hole into a makeshift magic bag. Then the villagers crammed the pit with chunks of meat, tamped the upturned soil over it, and sealed it tight so the meat stayed fresh all year. The villagers press, will it really last that long? Alfred grins, steadies their nerves, and tells them not to worry. Everyone admired Alfred. Now they had even more reasons to make him stay here. The young man, in that moment, believed they were talking about everything. The inhabitants figured it meant a celebration tonight. Vivi knelt by the fresh mound of earth, whispering, rest in peace, Muffy, while nobody even glanced her way. Soon the whole crew was searing meat over crackling fires, laughter and holiday cheer filling the night. Children and women beamed as they devoured the succulent meat. A man thrust the choicest cuts at Alfred, insisting he try them too, and Alfred bit in, grinning that they were undeniably delicious. He flagged down the man and asked for a vegetarian dish and some juice. The boy grabbed the fried vegetables and juice and dashed to the far corner of the square. Then he bounded over to Vivi and told the girl she'd done a great job. She declared she wouldn't eat. Alfred swore he wouldn't force her. Then her stomach roared, and Alfred said he'd brought fried vegetables, but she snapped she had no appetite. A girl sprinted up to Vivi and gushed it tasted amazing, but Vivi turned away. The girl shrugged and said bluntly that everyone eats living creatures to survive. Her sister blurted it out, and Vivi stared down the plate of meat before admitting to the girl that she was right. Millet snaps that Muffy became meat for a reason, and Vivi bites out, so am I supposed to eat every last bite so nothing goes to waste? Vivi snaps Millet's right and lunges for her plate. She tore into the meat and gasped, this is amazing. Huge tears welled in her eyes as she thanked Muffy for the tasty meat. By nightfall, Femi had crashed onto the floor while Alfred and Vivi sprawled on the bed. Alfred felt Vivi burrow against him again and figured she was at it once more. He snapped his eyes open and spun toward the girl. She was crying in her sleep, calling for Muffy, and shock slammed into him. He brushed Vivi's tears away, vowed everything would be fine, pulled a blanket snug around her and whispered, sweet dreams. Vivi's smile bloomed as she laced her fingers through Alfred's. The next morning the girl ripped through the silence, yelling at Alfred to wake. They still had work to do today. The boy sprang to his feet, rubbing his eyes, snapping at Vivi that she'd woken him with a jolt and demanding if she'd come to her senses yet. Vivi shot back that she was fine, and Millet burst in, announcing she'd brought breakfast. Sister Millet probed the Sky King, are you all right? Vivi blushed, confessing she must have made everyone worry. Alfred suspected the good dream had done this to her. He strode out of the room grinning, certain this was the one thing that mattered. Later they sat down to breakfast, and Vivi pushed back her plate, declaring she was full. Suddenly the village elder strode over and asked Alfred for a favor. Alfred's jaw dropped. He hadn't expected the man to come. The village chief pointed at yesterday's meat and declared he'd go to town tomorrow to sell it. The young man agreed, and the chief warned that rumors were spreading that bandits had appeared lately. That's why he begs the young man to come with him. The young man snaps back that he's the one who always sells meat to the merchants who come through the village, and the man nods, saying the merchants won't arrive for another month. Meat is piled high and the boy is drained from yesterday's magic. Alfred flashes a confident grin, tells the headman to stop worrying and leave it to him, and the headman studies the tired boy, shrugs and walks away. Worry surged through the girls as Millet told him not to push himself. They had plenty of time, and Alfred waved it off, vowed he'd be fine, and thanked them for worrying about him. He felt the elders' urgent push to sell the meat while summer still burned. Autumn's tax season was barreling in. He bursts into the room, yanks on his clothes, and orders Vivi to get ready. She snaps, why me? And Alfred says the girl's specialty is magic circles. The girl beams, declaring this is absolutely her specialty, and Alfred snaps that they just need to crank out enough magic bags. Crimson flooding her cheeks, she teased that her dear Alfred was hopeless. Alfred faced Millet, apologized and confessed he couldn't wash the dishes, and she waved it off, insisting it was fine. After a while the young man conjures magic. He strips the hide from that giant cow, and using sorcery, stitches it into several massive bags. He snarls at Vivi to crank up the volume first. Because they're hauling raw meat, he has to weave a circle that holds a constant state, and since they're riding a carriage, he must carve a second circle to lock the mass. Vivi snaps that creating 3 types at once is brutal, but she'll try to apply them. If anything goes wrong, he must tell her, and the young man agrees. As the last sparks died, everything was ready. The boy declared Vivi a master of magic circles, and she elevated his work with a technique he'd never seen. The young man snaps that all that's left for them to do is pack the meat and check their equipment. Millet rings Vivi, firing off the question, why did the girls start calling Alfred, her dear Al, today? Vivi's baffled. She says she doesn't know what he's talking about, and Millet snaps that she used to call Alfred a different name. She flushes and shrugs. No particular reason, she murmurs. Everyone calls him that, so I just tried it, she adds, squirming and insisting she definitely has no other reason. Millet froze, eyes wide, and blurted she felt like she was somehow deceiving her. Alfred watches them, warmth swelling in his chest as Vivi trades laughter and whispered worries with the villagers. She started shouldering their joys and pains, and in his eyes, become a true resident of Merg. At dawn they tore into an 8-hour trek to the big city to sell Muffy's meat, flanked by escorts Femi and Albert, while Millet ran the trade and Vivi and Colette served as his assistants. Millet leaned in and asked Alfred how he'd liked the trip. Alfred grinned and said it was quite good, while Colette burst into chatter about how Fam was so fluffy. Alfred offered to swap places, saying he'd driven carts before. The girl promised she'd call on the boy if she grew tired, and Kalehatz boasted her sister was a relentless workaholic. The elders slammed a hand onto their shoulders and barked, I'm counting on you, Millet and Alfred. Alfred saw that, despite her youth, Millet shone with honesty and steady wisdom. The chief and the villagers trusted her so completely they picked her to represent the village. She could even win the next election and become the new village chief. Vivi sighed and snatched Alfred's attention away. The boy told the girl she was heavy and her horn jabbed him. She swore she was light, but he argued. His legs were already going numb. Colette snapped an order for Femi to attack. The girls shrieked for Femi not to lick her, and Alfred roared for them to stop misbehaving and calm down. Mollett's grin split his face as he burst out, it's incredibly sweet. After a while, Femi stiffened and went deadly serious. She told Alfred what she'd felt, and he leaned in, demanding, what happened? The boy barked at Femi to cover the rear. She nodded and spun to the end of the cart. Millet shot a quick question at him. Then an arrow screamed toward the girl and terror pinned her to the spot. He slammed up a shimmering ward that snatched the arrow from the air, then barked, Millet, inside now. Bandits pounced on the cart, and Alfred knew instantly they were the usual kind. They slaughtered the coachman, yanked off the cart and horse, then jammed logs across the road so the horse couldn't bolt. He vaulted out of the carriage, sizing them up and realizing just how skilled they were. One of the men snarled to Alfred that if he handed over the goods and the horse they'd let him live, but the young man barked that the cargo was too important and refused. A cold smile crosses the man's face as he declares that anyone who utters such words soon dies. Alfred snaps back that the same fate awaits those who obediently nod along. The man snaps that it's false. People are a key part of profit, able to be forged into valuable servants. Vivi bristled, finding the remark flat-out rude. Alfred sighed and vowed he wouldn't be captured by bandits or let them flee. He'd beat everything out of them and told everyone to come to him. He snarled that they were annoying him, barked for his boys to kill them, and snapped into a fighting stance. Impatience boiled in Alfred as they inched forward at a maddening crawl. I'm fine with that, they're just bandits, small fry, and he never goes hunting for a fight. In the blink of an eye the boy materialized behind them, glowing chains snaking around their wrists, and the men crumpled to the ground, their hands locked fast. Alfred leapt into action, corralling the bandits, and the man snapped at the young man to stop acting cocky. His people were packed into that cart right now. Alfred froze in the hush as a scream shattered the air. Fem barreled into the bandits as they clambered into the cart. A man yelled to his other comrades to shoot, and Alfred said it was very sad. The moment you can watch an arrow streak toward you, it loses its bite. An arrow loosed from the bushes hurtled for Femi. The young man twisted the wind into a barrier, saved him, and slammed the arrow back into the thicket. He bound the shooter in tight, unforgiving knots. Alfred snaps, can you sense anyone else? Femi exhales, calm and certain. All clear, I don't sense anyone. Alfred grinned, relief washing over him as he said, if so, that's a relief, then barked at Femi, gather all the bandits together. He charges to the carriage and snaps, are the girls okay? Vivi, stunned, blurts, is it over already? Millet shrugs and insists, it's okay already. Alfred's breath hitched when he spotted an unfinished magic circle carved into the carriage floor. Vivi had been racing to weave an arrow ward to shield them all, but she ran out of time. Alfred smirks, declaring that in the fury of battle magic circles don't have to be pristine, and Vivi snaps back that even a single defect can stop the circle from working. Alfred insists even if it's only 70% finished it'll still work. If it fails, the girl can just redraw it. quantity beats quality, and Vivid chews on that idea. Alfred exploded into laughter, so she's finally serious now. He scoffed at how obsessively Vivi drew every circle. Academy masters carve rune circles that unleash jaw-dropping miracles, but they're forged for ritual study, not the blood-splattered chaos of the battlefield. He insists wandering wizards can conjure magic without a single spell. Femi leans in, sniffs the boy, and proclaims everything's ready. Alfred shoves Femi aside, insisting she couldn't smell him there because it's embarrassing. Femi blinks, baffled by the young man's words as bandits pile into the carriage and are bound together by a magical chain. Alfred slides into the driver's seat. Millet offers to drive the carriage, but Alfred snaps that it's too dangerous now and he'll have to protect the girl himself. Millet vows Alfred will protect her again. The girl asks, "Is that true?" And the young man answers with a firm yes, urging her to rely on him. The boy blurts he can drive the car to Lone. Millet flushes with embarrassment and urges him to go all out, and Colette beams that it's utterly charming. After a long walk, the city bursts into view. The young man points and calls out, "It's right ahead." When the heroes burst into the city, he dragged the bandits before the guard. The bandits were wanted, and the heroes pocketed a hefty reward. Alfred swept his hand out, beckoning the girls to a mouth-watering dinner. Millet turns to him and asks, "Did we do a good job?" Then Alfred's eyes snapped around, scanning every inch. He gaped, stunned by the city's staggering size. Vivi scoffed, "Looks like this place is crawling with a whole crowd of lesser beings." Alfred barked at the girl to yank her hood up. She shot back, "Why?" And he warned that if his demonic nature were exposed, it would bring serious trouble. Vivi's shoulders slump. "I have no choice," she breathes, yanking her hood up, a tired sigh escaping as she thanks the girl. Milet scoffed, disbelief sparking in her voice that the town's feudal lord could truly despise demons. Alfred shrugged it off, saying it was just to be on the safe side. He whirled to Femi and barked an order to act like a dog. She shot back the most adorable puppy-eyed face. Colette beamed with delight as Alfred's blood ran cold. She was now indistinguishable from a dog, and they reached the merchant. Millet steps up and vows he'll go negotiate the sale. She pins her hopes on her companion's help, and after a while the man says he understands their circumstances, but he still can't shake doubts about whether the meat is really okay. Millet boasted that thanks to their farmers and mages the meat was top tier. The village cows yielded bright red flesh, fat that melted on the tongue, thick slabs of marbled tenderloin, and every customer devoured it with pure delight. He runs his hand over the meat, declares it prime, says the whispered rumors that dragged him here have him itching to try it, and points out a few locals who can wield preservation magic. Dread coiled in him that a mage from some tiny village could wreck it all. The man shot Alfred a sidelong look and snapped, "Do you have any written guarantees?" Alfred slammed a card into the man's hand and declared it a magician's ID from the team of heroes, and the man staggered back, stunned when his eyes landed on the certificate. The man snaps, "Why are you doing that?" Alfred cuts him off, hissing that his presence here must stay a secret for now. The man exhales, nods, and whispers, "I understand. I'm very sorry." His adventurer's card is impossible to forge, so trust wraps around him like armor. He's S-rank, and the man smiles, beckoning everyone back to the negotiating table. Millet shoots Alfred a tight, grateful nod, thanking him as the air snaps tense, and the room teeters into a negotiation. Alfred shrugs and snaps that everything's fine, insisting it's the magician's duty to ensure the magical effect. He thrust a few measly coins my way for the meat. The girl thanked him. Vivi piped up that they'd emptied a bag like that, and the sun began to sink just after the deal wrapped up. Right as the young men wrestled the cart into place, the man who'd bought their meat marched over and pulled Alfred aside to go over one point. He grins and asks if he can brag to his son that he met the honorable gentleman. Alfred insists he owes the man his thanks for the service, but demands it remain secret. The man steps up and asks the boy for an autograph, saying his son idolizes him, and Alfred scoffs and calls it no big deal. His fandom pins him. He can't refuse. The boy presses for the name of the man's son, and Vivi snaps, "Are you going to keep us waiting?" After a while they slip away, and the man calls after them with a warm, grateful shout, "Thank you so much. If you need anything else, come to me again anytime." At sunset the carriage hurtled toward the inn. With a brief lull after their work, the young man asked why they wouldn't stroll down the castle street, and they spotted some mouth-watering treats. Colette's eyes gleamed. They looked delicious. Vivi shot back that you can't find those in Merg village, and they still looked delicious. Alfred grinned and sided with the girls. Alfred slams a bulging bag of coins on the counter and demands 5 of those goodies. Then he freezes, remembers Femi, and snaps, "I need one more." The girls tore into the sweets, and Vivi's jaw dropped. Each bite hit like a revelation, impossibly rich and wildly delicious. Alfred stared at the pile, questioning if it was fit for a dog or a wolf, but Femi wasn't ordinary. Drool pooled at her muzzle, so he handed her the treats and popped one into his own mouth to test it. He realizes a warm, intoxicating sweetness is surging through his bone-weary body. They watch the meat being carved. Femi tells Alfred she wants to eat it. The boy asks if any limit tames her hunger. They'd come all the way here, so he flashes a grin and urges them to cut loose. The young man sweeps in, buying meat for everyone and declaring the steak so heavenly it must have fallen from the sky. Millet says the food stalls aren't bad, and Vivi agrees. Alfred watches everyone, certain they're stuffed and smiling after that delicious meal, and since they'll be staying in Femi, he booked a slightly pricey hotel for Millet. The hotel attendant ushers them into the room with a bright smile and urges them to make themselves at home. Millet bows a quick, grateful thanks and Alfred snaps, "Why are we sharing a room?" The young man bursts into the room, spots 2 beds and spins to me, demanding, "What are they for?" Alfred blurts, "Will you sleep with me?" Millet smirks, "Yes, I will. This hotel's expensive, so is that a problem?" Alfred was certain it would happen the instant she figured it out. Vivi bursts into the room and snaps that sleeping in the same room is fine. This isn't just casual sharing. She peels off her shoes and stockings and casually admits she usually sleeps in Alfred's bed. The young man scrambles for his phone and calls her, his voice trembling with nerves. Millet blurted, trembling, that Alfred and Vivi were sleeping together, her face freezing in stunned disbelief. Alfred bristled at the idea of an old man bunking with a girl of marriageable age, and Millet pounced, snapping, "Is it true you and Vivi are sleeping together?" Alfred grins and agrees. It's because they share a bed. Femi sleeps with them too. Millet blurts that Femi's actually a dog, and Femi snaps that she's a wolf. Vivi cuts them off and bursts out, "Can I sleep in Al's bed like always?" Femi scores the green light to sleep with Malayat and Colty. Right then Femi lunged and launched into licking Vivi's face with wild, puppy-like abandon. Millet swept Vivi into her arms and vowed the girl would sleep with her. Vivi barked that with Colty it would be cramped. Millet snapped that even sleeping together would still be awkward. Alfred blinked as he realized they were arguing for some reason, and Vivi leaned in and asked why Millet was angry. Was she jealous? Millet's cheeks flare crimson as a wave of embarrassment seizes them. Alfred shrugs and says he doesn't mind sleeping on the floor. Millet snaps she absolutely won't let him. Alfred insists it's okay. After years roaming as an adventurer, even a plain wooden floor felt like salvation next to cold dirt and jagged rocks. Coletti storms in and cuts them off, declaring she'll sleep with Mr. Then. Millet shrugs it off and insists she thinks everything will be fine. At last the boy dove into bed with Coletti and Femi, and Coletti beamed, thrilled by how gloriously fluffy Femi was. The girl whispered good night to Alfred. The boy tucked a blanket around her and echoed the wish. At that moment, Vivi urged Millet to move a little more. Millet snarled that Vivi was only spilling half the truth. Vivi fired back that the girl was babbling nonsense, claiming a lesser being could ever stand equal to her. Alfred slept when a sudden rustling slithered into his ears. He shot awake and found Millet had slipped into bed beside him, curled up against him and nuzzling his side. The young man shouted her name, but she didn't answer. She slept on, her ears twitching. He figured she'd gone to the bathroom, but half asleep she stumbled into the wrong bed. When he reached to call her, she snatched his hand. Then she shouted his name and flung her dream into the world. Inside, he pressed his palm to his face. The next morning, Vivi shot upright, stretched, and froze. Melee was gone. She glared at Alfred's bed and shouted what Melee was doing. She shrieked about that shameless elf who had crept into the guy's bed in the dead of night. Millet screamed that she hadn't even noticed. Vivi jabbed a finger at Millet and accused her of lying. Millet insisted she wasn't, but Vivi scoffed and said the lie was written all over her face. Millet let out a huge yawn. Vivi snapped that the girl shouldn't do that. Millet grabbed her blanket and flopped back into bed. Alfred stared, utterly baffled by her odd behavior. Mollet, half buried in blankets, told Alfred she'd steal a few more precious minutes of sleep. Vivi gaped, shook the blanket, and blurted she couldn't take her eyes off her for a second. She pulled Millet along, and the girl murmured she wanted to sleep, but Vivi snapped they had a lot of work to do today. Bleary-eyed Colette whispered she wanted to sleep, so Alfred scooped her up, promising she'd nap on the way. Then, oddly, they left the hotel and plunged into the city to go shopping. Millet clutched the village chief's note and demanded everyone leave their shopping with her. Alfred grinned and declared bargaining was her job. She was born for it. Then Colette called to him and jabbed a finger off to the side. Colette jabbed at the stalls. Alfred's eyes snapped to them. He knew exactly what she meant. He thrusts money into their hands, promises he'll handle everything, and tells them to go, so the girls beam and sprint to the sweet cellars. They burst back beaming with treats in hand. Just then Millet was hauling a heavy grocery bag, and Alfred jumped in to hoist it into the cart for the girl. They shouldered their packs and surged forward, launching their journey with fierce momentum. Millet beamed that she'd sampled a parade of mouth-watering dishes and had an absolute blast this time, and Alfred chimed that he'd had fun too. At that moment, Cald and Vivi watched the city shrink and slip away beneath them. Colette's smile bloomed as she lifted her hand and sent the city one last, bittersweet wave. The ride home hung in tense silence until the carriage shuddered. Millet flinched with raw fright, and Alfred laughed, asking the girl if she really felt at home. He warned the road ahead was brutal. Millet shrugged that it couldn't be helped, and as they neared the village's edge, Millet smiled at seeing it again while the young man nodded, certain they'd already come home. He'd roamed the world chasing wild adventures and never tasted the feeling of coming home. Now he's finally back. Relief surges through him, and even in this short stay, the village has already stolen his heart. Alfred barked he'd unload every purchase right now. Vivi leaped in to help, grinning that the bag was featherlight thanks to his magic. Delighted cries exploded around Alfred. One man said the boy must be bone-tired from the long journey. He beams with genuine gratitude for their contribution to the village. A woman exclaims that thanks to the giant cow meat is cheaper, and it's a huge lifeline, and Vivi bellows that it is her doing. Alfred reddened and waved it off. "It's nothing, I'm just doing my job as a guard," he insisted. The elder leaned in and said he'd heard the young man had been crucial in protecting them from bandits. Millet burst out, spilling to everyone what Alfred had done earlier. The elder urged the boy to go rest today. Alfred grinned and said, "That's a good idea." Alfred pictured himself sinking into the tub, thinking the moment you returned to the hot springs, abode you'd charge straight for the most obvious spot. Alfred marched up to the village elder and blurted out where he could find a good bathhouse, and the elder caught his meaning instantly, nodded, and promised to show him. They slid into the steaming hot springs, letting the long journey's fatigue dissolve, and Malik grinned, saying it was the first time they'd all come here together. Vivi clung to the steaming baths as the only thing she liked here. The young man wanted to come back more often to speed his knee's recovery, and at last they reached the hot spring. Alfred urged the girls to go first. Millet snapped that the boy should go first. Alfred doubled down, insisting the girls go first, and Millet shrugged they weren't in any hurry. Vivi snapped, "I'll go first." She'd had enough, and just then Femi burst into the room. Alfred declared he had to wash them and barreled ahead to go first. Millet coaxed the boy, "Don't be shy." Confusion clawed at Vivi. Why had he stepped forward first? The young man rips off his shirt and declares, "The hot spring's pretty small, but it's really nice," and Fem lets out an eager, approving bark. He bursts inside and proclaims, "This is the hot spring I've been longing to bathe in. The weather's perfect for an unforgettable soak." He spots their teetering on a cliff's edge, knows it's too dangerous for the girls, and quickly throws up a protective barrier, then spins to Fem and vows he'll wash her. After a while, Femisphere had flipped completely soup, and Alfred confessed he'd been obsessing over it lately. He dared her to tell him her intelligence hadn't deteriorated. Femi screamed that was terribly rude. The young man gave an awkward smile and said she'd lately been unable to shake this dog-like aura or something. He assumed she only yapped. Fem lamented it as tragic. Humans simply couldn't understand her, shackled to the frail instrument they call speech. Alfred snaps, "Do you really think they'd be helpless if they can't speak?" Fem scoffs, "That's not the point." She leans forward. "There are so many other ways to communicate," then sneers, "The boy's just a newbie." Alfred gaped, baffled by her rudeness. The boy insisted he understood, then boasted he'd wash every bubble from her fur, and Fem snapped that proved he was so rude he couldn't even see his own stupidity. He barked for her to brace herself. He was about to drench her, when a sudden, ecstatic shriek erupted, someone gushing about how amazing the mountain hot spring was, and Vivi screamed at Colette to calm down because it was dangerous. Colette announced to Alfred they'd come to see him, and Vivi, tearing after the girl, snapped at the young man to stop staring. Alfred swore he hadn't even glanced. They already knew he was inside. Vivi said the boy was trying to warn her she shouldn't have come in. Vivi sneered that she was a high-class demon who would never stoop to the common practices of lower beings. Alfred barked back, demanding why her actions didn't match her words. Vivi spun to the entrance and announced Millet wanted to thank the boy. Right then the girl beckoned Alfred, thanked him for everything he'd done, and smiling sweetly, offered to wash his back. The boy whirls to Millet and snaps, "What do you mean by thank you?" She tightens her fist and fires back, "Leave it to me." Then the girl snapped the towel taut. Alfred sprang up and shouted that nothing was needed. Everything suited him as it was. Millet urged the young man not to hold back. The young man turned to Fem with hope blazing in his eyes, but she, not paying attention, floated in the bathtub. Alfred waved it off, telling the girl not to fuss over him. Millet, drained by the long trek, pushed the boy toward a steaming hot spring to relax. It was her thank you for defending them from the bandits. She planted him down and snapped, "Just accept it and sit obediently." Alfred's defiance shattered. He realized he couldn't refuse her. Millet's eyes snapped to the jagged scars across Alfred's back. Alfred says, "They're from when I was an adventurer." The girl beams, "That's so cool." While washing Colette's hair, Vivi sneered that scars on the back were a disgrace for a knight, and the young man shot back that he was not a knight. Vivi brushed floor grit from her forehead and declared they were done. At that very moment, Colette bolted into the bathroom straight for Fem. They flailed in the water as Millet snapped at Alfred that she was done protecting him, and the young man thanked her. She stepped in front of him and declared she'd wash him from the front. Alfred insisted he could wash himself from the front. She smiled and urged him not to hold back. The boy surrendered to Millet's cool fingers as they slid over him, every muscle loosening into calm. He snatched the washcloth from her and demanded the girl watch him wash himself, insisting everything was fine. Vivi summoned Alfred and ordered him to wash her back, declaring it a great honor for him. The boy gapes, baffled why he has to do it. Millet rushes over to Vivi, offering to scrub her back too. Vivi snaps that she only came because she wanted Alfred to wash her back. The girl shot back, "Maybe you'll pull it off next time." Vivi chuckled, declared he was saved, and he thanked her silently in his head. After a while, he sinks into the bath and melts into the water's comforting warmth. He looks up, convinced heaven hangs within arm's reach, as a warm pulse knits his knee back to life. Colette whirls to him and asks if the boy's knee still hurts. Alfred agrees but says it's bearable, and Colette lights up, declaring she'll give the mister a massage if his knee aches. Alfred thanked Colette and breathed that he felt much better. The girl smiled. The pain was bearable, but his knees still throbbed. "Now that I think about it," a grizzled ex-adventurer in a bar leaned in and confessed his joints howled mostly when the weather turned sour. He knows in his bones this feeds his pain too. He can still live an ordinary life, but the adventurer's road grinds him down. If a battle erupted, even he, the man who dissects the smartest opponents and pinpoints their weak spots, could become the group's most exposed target. No one can ever relax like that on an adventure. At one point, Colette bolts out of the bath, screaming the water's too hot as she scrambles free, and Millet yells, "Wait for me." Alfred cuts them off, vowing he'll watch over her. With Vivian finally getting her chance, they can stand down, and Millet snaps that they'll take the boy up on his offer. After a while, Millet beamed and declared the hot springs were absolutely incredible, pure healing heat that melted every ache. She scooped Colette up and vowed she'd call them the moment she finished cooking dinner, and Alfred bowed his head and thanked the girl. Femi yanked Alfred's focus, and from the sidelines he watched the village elder thank the men for their help. A young man strode up to the village elder and asked to speak about business. The elder nodded, revealed he had a request for Vivi, and Vivi's eyes flew wide as she demanded to know what he wanted. The man swallowed hard and admitted it pained him to ask, and after consulting everyone, they begged the girl to use her enlargement magic to grow the cow again. Alfred's jaw dropped. Convinced she'd just ballooned to twice her size and lose that Muffy look, the young man bowed to the elder, apologized that they couldn't help, and begged pardon for the disturbance. Alfred was convinced raising massive cows would be far more convenient, but Vivi sank into a crushing depression after that incident. The girl spun on Alfred and demanded why he'd refused them, snarling that if anyone was going to refuse them, it should have been her, and the young man crumpled, stammering an apology. Vivi spun to face the elder and declared, "No problem at all." Alfred gaped, utterly stunned. The man blurted, "Is this really okay?" And Alfred planted a steady hand on the girl's shoulder, urging her not to force herself. He was a seasoned mage. Copying the girl was within his skill, even if it would be a hassle. Vivi smirked. The boy had just called himself an experienced mage. She snapped, "Who do you think I am? One of the 4 heavenly rulers of the Demon King's army and a genius magician." Alfred questioned her claim to genius, worry gnawing at him, so he told the girl to ask him for help if she needed it. Vivi waved him off and he pressed, "Are you sure?" Vivi's cheeks burned as she confessed she couldn't say the boy couldn't help and told him to hang back and watch, just in case. Alfred straightens, eyes alight. "If that's the case, I think I can learn from you," and Vivi beams, replying, "That's great." The next day, the young man strode onto the farm with Vivi and Femi to start work. Millet met them at the gate, worry etched across his face as he asked Vivi if she'd be okay. Vivi collapsed onto the grass, sneered that they were inferior beings, then smirked. "You don't have to worry about the Demon King's army's heavenly sovereign." She starts etching a magic circle while Alfred watches Vivi, convinced she's finally made peace with the Muffy incidents, and relief rushes through him at her smile. He's convinced they've finally slipped back into their old, ordinary lives. Shortly after Alfred stepped up as Merg Village's guardian, most of its problems settled down, and now he's kicking back, savoring a peaceful retirement. The young man realizes he's drowning in way too much free time. He slumps into his seat, utterly motionless, doing nothing. The boy grins and asks Femi to play for a while, hurling balls and promising a reward if she brings one back. So Femi bolts after a ball while Vivi, crouched drawing on the ground, calls out that she's kicking up dust. Alfred watched Fem's canine instincts snap awake as she went utterly feral. At that moment, Vivi smirked and said, "She's nothing but a wild dog." She jerks Alfred toward the circles and orders him to examine them, forged for offensive magic, yet cloaked with an exquisite concealment technique that lets the boy ghost through unseen. The boy's eyes widen as he spots how cleverly they're made. Femi rushes back with the ball. He pats her on the head and tells her she's doing a good job, and Vivi snaps, furious that Femi interrupted their conversation. Femi deliberately wiped away the magic circle Vivi had drawn with her tail. Vivi snapped into a blaze of fury and dove at him, and they erupted into a fight while Alfred, watching, yelled at them to control themselves. Fem leapt at Vivi and showered her with sloppy licks, and Vivi recoiled, snapping she'd end up smelling like a dog. Alfred watched Fem and Vivi and burst into laughter, convinced he was truly happy with his life. In the dead of night, with the world asleep, Fem's eyes snapped open and she heaved herself upright. He jolted awake at her rustling and snapped, "If you need the toilet, go now," but Fem shot back that it wasn't the problem. The young man spotted Femi wagging her ear, shot out of bed and asked what was wrong. At that exact moment, Vivi also rose from the bed, rubbing her eyes and saying she wanted to sleep. Alfred snapped at Vivi to go to sleep, but Femi cut him off, saying she'd been called and asking if the boy had heard them. Alfred froze, confused, and then the she-wolf said she'd heard her brothers howling. Alfred cupped his ear, hunted the silence, then shook his head. "I hear nothing." Femmer shot back, eyes narrowing. "It looks like something's happened." She faced the young man and asked if she could take a short vacation. Alfred lit the lamp and offered to help Femi with anything she needed. Stepping out of the house, Femi said the young man could take her home. She flung her gaze skyward and declared it her duty as a king, her duty as Fem. Femi swelled into colossal size, and the boy gasped that it felt like an eternity since he'd last seen her form. The wolf swore she'd return tomorrow for lunch. Alfred pressed Femi to tell him the instant she ran into trouble. When he first met her, she was nothing but skin and bone, trembling and hollow. Now Femi blazed with fearless strength, and she leaned in and rubbed her nose against the boy. Alfred swore he'd be fine so she could go. Femi agreed and sprinted off, and the boy stood alone, watching his friend's silhouettes shrink into the distance. He watched until Femi slipped into the shadows, blew the candle out in one fierce exhale, and dove back under the covers. The young man dove into bed, yet sleep abandoned him. He was sure the magical wolves had grown, so Femi waved it off and told them to leave the pack alone, but Femi, being called, screamed that something serious had happened. Suddenly, a vivid dream explodes inside Alfred's mind. Vivi jolted him awake. He sprang upright and snapped at her to stop. He was already awake. Vivi snapped, "What happened?" The boy moaned like someone still caught in a nightmare. Alfred grabbed his head and said he seemed to have had a terrible nightmare. Vivi swept her gaze around, sneering that Alfred was moaning from a nightmare, nothing surprising from a lesser creature, then demanded where the little dog had gone. Alfred grimly said something had happened to her pack, so she had returned to the forest. Alfred held his breath, wondering if Vivi would burst with excitement, but in the end she trembled, afraid of Femi. He bolted upright, yanked on his clothes, tore through a bowl of millet with the others, then marched off to his post as usual. The young man slumped at the village gate while Vivi knelt nearby, tracing magic circles into the dirt. Memories of Femi playing ball came crashing back all at once. A hollow sigh ripped from the boy. Vivi leaned in and asked if he was worried about the dog. Alfred said she'd be back for dinner. Vivi pushed, asking if that meant he had nothing to worry about. Alfred hesitated and said he thought so. Vivi snapped at him to look. Alfred demanded what kind of magic circle it was. Vivi declared it a protective sigil. Draw it on the boy's forehead, and it will shield him from nightmares. She proclaimed she'd invented it herself. Alfred could tell Vivi was fretting about him, even if only a little. He tracked the villagers streaming in and out, ticking them off in his head, and decided today was just like any other, nothing amiss. He peered down the forest path, sprang to his feet, and slammed the shutters shut on the village gate. Night had already swallowed the sky, and the young man's mind ignited into a rush of thought. Millet burst out and told the boy his food was ready and to head to the table. He thanked her, then Colette raced over and asked the mister if Femi wasn't coming home. He forces a nod, convincing himself she's just busy, then holds his breath, desperate that Fem won't run into trouble. He declared, voice like iron, that she's the magical wolf king. He's sure she'll be okay. He polished off his portion, thanked Millet warmly, and beamed, "It's delicious again today." Gratitude flared in Millet's eyes as he met the young man's gaze and thanked him for the praise. A bark ripped through the air as Fem's huge head shoved its way into the room. The she-wolf thumped her tail with pure joy. Colette barreled into Fem and crushed her in a tight hug. Alfred greeted Fem and called out that she'd gotten home a little late. With a sharp exhale, the she-wolf locked eyes with the young man and begged him to help. Shock widened Alfred's eyes, then he snapped, "Leave it to her." Asked why she wasn't resting. Fem shot back they didn't have much time, so Alfred promised he'd be ready in a jiffy and told her to grab a drink while she waited. He yanked on his clothes and declared he was ready to leave, and Fem vowed she'd explain the situation as they sprinted away. Vivi slammed to a stop and shouted she would go. Fem and Alfred whirled around, surprise carved into their faces. Then the young man hoisted the girl up onto Fem. He pegged Vivi as an exceptional mage who could be a real asset, offered to go with her, but Fem swooped in and scooped her up so she wouldn't have to sit, and Vivi told Fem to take her too. Alfred locked eyes with Fem and admitted he was powerless if she refused, but Vivi could step in and help. Fem ripped up protocol and carved out an exception for the emergency. Vivi shot her a grateful "thank you." Millet and Colette stood watch, hearts clenched, praying the trio would race back quickly and unharmed. They vowed they'd see it through, then blasted off on their journey. Alfred barked the question at Fem, "What do we do?" Fem's voice cut through the chaos. An enemy had appeared she couldn't handle alone. Vivi smirked, sneering that it was such a sad thing, so painfully obvious, because Fem was just a dog. Alfred realized that even though Vivi was terrified of that woman, it didn't stop her from taunting Fem, so he spun to Fem and demanded, "What kind of enemy are we up against?" Femi's words struck like a thunderclap. Their enemy was the great immortal dragon. Alfred's smile died and a hard frown carved across his face. The dragon reigns as the most powerful beast. A full-grown adult is a walking cataclysm of power, and because it's undead, it keeps moving even after taking what should finish it. They could smash his skull and wreck his heart and he'd still keep moving. To stop him, they'd have to sever every limb and burn them to ashes, and he knows it'll take them a long time. In a heartbeat, Vivi recoiled, every muscle snapping taut. Alfred darted forward, voice tight, as he asked if she was all right and insisted she didn't have to come with them, and Vivi cut in sharp, demanding what the young man was saying. She laughed, boasting that even the great immortal dragon stood no chance against her, yet the young man's stomach dropped when he realized Vivi was trembling with terror. After a moment, Fem came to a stop. The boy blurted, "Is this the place?" and Fem answered with a firm yes. She marched them toward jagged peaks, and then Vivi's skin prickled. When she peered into the forest thicket, many eyes glowed back. Fear squeezed Vivi stiff, and Femi shot back, "They're her followers." He fires a sharp question, "What's our situation?" and Femi strides in, calm and fierce, saying, "I'll explain everything." Last night, an immortal dragon struck out of nowhere, attacking alone. Her magical wolves lunged to repel it but were overwhelmed, and they pleaded with her to step in. At that moment, a writhing swarm of tiny undead dragons burst forth, shattering their plan, and Femi snapped her gaze to the young man. Alfred swept his gaze across the area, taking in the numerous lifeless bodies of small dragons scattered around. The young man said, eyes blazing with awe, "Those tiny dragons, who would have imagined they'd slain 3 undead dragons? This flock is downright amazing." Femi squared her shoulders, vowed to fight alone even if it meant casualties, so she turned the boy. Femi reigns as the enchanted king of wolves. She's sworn to shield a pack of enchanted wolves. She bows her head, voice trembling, and pleads with anyone within earshot to help her. Alfred won't claim Femi can win, he'll only say she can fight, and Femi knows, down to her bones, exactly how outmatched she is by the enemy. As a king, she stoops her head, becoming a living shield for her flock. Alfred proclaims Fem a great king and commands her to lift her head high. He flashes a grin and asks her to leave it to them. They'll help. Vivi urges Femi to be confident and count on them. The boy sweeps his gaze across the mountains and murmurs that it's eerily quiet, and Fem snaps that the dragons are bearing straight for Fem Forest. Alfred shouts that a village called Merg crouches beside the Fem Forest, clear proof he's on duty as a guard. He buries his hand in Fem's fur and begs the pack to leave the colossal dragon to him, while the wolves surge out to fight, stalling the beast with savage tenacity for as long as they can. Vivi's voice cracked, "What should I do?" Alfred assured her to act as she knew how. He trusted her completely. Vivi spun and sprinted away, shouting that she understood. The boy unleashed his magic, summoning the Queen of Fire, Sovereign of the Blazing Heavens, and the Prince of Demons, Lord of Hell, then pleaded with them to fling open Purgatory's gates with the holy key. He spins to the Lord of the Sun and the Earth and implores them to incinerate the world's impurities in their hellish, eternally dark flames. He declared, "My name is Alfred Lent." A titanic wave ripped across the area, then a blistering wall of flame struck everything, and Vivi stood frozen, unable to make sense of the monstrous force. Alfred glares at the mountains swallowed by fire and snaps at the dragon about how it feels, choking back his magic to keep the forest from burning. What happens next? The young man froze, staring up at the colossal dragon as the truth slammed into him. His strike hadn't turned it to ash. Nothing less could fell a creature that mighty. He's been reanimated as a zombie, ringed by a crackling arcane barrier. The boy spots the tiny dragons peeking out and realizes they survived by hiding in the great dragon's shadow. Alfred's shots bellowed for everyone to give their all and execute the plan, and the wolves surged into battle. The wolves slammed into the fray, their razor jaws snapping as they set upon the small dragons. Alfred wielded magical spears in battle, their blistering speed turning every strike into a lightning blur. Elancht unleashed a volley of magical spears at the dragon, only to watch the shimmering barrier fling them right back. The colossal dragon pins the young man with a merciless stare as Alfred hurls his magic spears again, roaring, "Round 2." In an instant the dragon spins, ripping the nearest trees to splinters as the young man hurtles aside, and his magical spears gouge a jagged crack across the dragon's barrier. He plants his feet, reactivates the magical spears, and declares the third round. The spears rocket straight at the dragon. They shatter the magical shield and impale the dragon's body. The beast erupts in a blood-curdling scream and convulses in agony. Pain rips through Alfred's undead body, shocking him. The foe looks pathetic, so he must finish him off and fast. Wolves rip the little dragons into a writhing heap as Alfred's eyes snapped to the hatchlings, which suddenly bolted straight for the massive dragon. Just as the massive dragon unfurled its wings and surged skyward, Vivi slammed her hands down, a blazing magic circle flaring to life as she shouted that the beast would not escape. She barked for him to say hello to her windblades, and a storm of razor windblades ripped from the air, plunging into the dragons hovering directly above them. Windblades sheared the dragon's limbs away. He plummeted and slammed right onto the ground with earth-shattering force. Alfred stared at the shattered barrier, certain it was gone and too drained to summon it back. He roared, "This is the dragon's end," and drove his magic spear forward. Vivi screamed that it was still moving. The boy ignited a flame in his palm and lulled the dragon into a peaceful slumber. He set it ablaze, watching hungry flames consume it until only ashes remained. Fem stared into the flames, threw back her head and howled a triumphant cry. Her pack echoed the king's howl and joined in a rising, thunderous chorus. Alfred couldn't shake the image of Fem, and the pack erupting into howls the instant they confirmed the dragon had been incinerated. The young man grinned and swiped sweat from his brow. Morning had already come, and they'd won this battle. He'd slain one great dragon and 20 small dragons. His thoughts shattered when Vivi cut in, saying it was very sad. Those proud dragons lie twisted into undead, shambling zombies. Alfred, agreeing with the girl, declares it a pitiful sight, swearing zombification magic is an absolute taboo. Who could do such a thing? When this spell lands, it rips control from the target and turns them into a walking corpse, yanking their living consciousness along as a puppet with zero control over their body. He presses a hand to his chest and bows, begging the dragons to finally rest, then spins to Vivi and barks for her to hurry and fetch the remains. Certain Millet and Colette are already worried. Vivi laughs and says she'll help too. They began carving the dragon apart. Alfred spun to the girl and demanded why she'd come with him today, and Vivi froze as fear clenched her. She froze for a heartbeat, then flashed a sly grin and declared she could bend those wolves into owing her a favor. She cackled triumphant and declared they were her debtors now. She didn't worry about them at all. The young man laughed. Vivi's worry about Fema gnawed at him. He reached out, patted her head and told her, "You did a great job." Vivi snapped, showering Alfred with playful smacks, when Fem piped up, asking if they were heading back to the village. Leaning against Alfred's house, Millet yawned. Then a sharp sound cut through the quiet, and she sprinted to the village entrance to see. Millet's gaze snapped to Alfred and Vivi calling for the girl, and Vivi barked, "Were they expecting us?" Millet flashed a grin and shot out a bright, friendly greeting. The boys shouted they'd reached home, and Colette shot into Fema's arms, burying her face in a fierce hug. Colette's face shot alight the moment she spotted Fem again. She swept Alfred into a hug and greeted her. Vivi zeroed in on Millet's huge dark circles and snapped, "You've been waiting for us this whole time and haven't slept." Millet laughed and said, "You caught us." They'd been waiting in the wings the whole time and nobody knew. Alfred rushed out an apology, saying he thought he'd disturbed them, but he still thanked the girls. Alfred's grin widened as relief washed over him. It's finally over and everything's okay, so he opted for a short breather and refused to push himself any further. After a while, Vivi traced a shimmering magic circle and snapped a question at Alfred. He shrugged and said he was just sorting through his bag, while Femi sprawled beside him, yawning. Millet yanks their attention, calls to Alfred and declares she's brought the elder. The man greets them and asks if they have any request for him. Alfred thanked the elder for coming, declared he had something to show first, then produced the great dragon's head from his inventory, and the elder gaped so wide his eyes nearly popped out. He collapses to the ground, utterly bewildered, as Alfred grins and declares that last night 20 dragons showered him with a mountain of things. He yanks the horn out and bellows that they're massive and crushingly heavy. He rang the elder, hunting for a place he could rent to stash it all. His bag bulged, and there was no need to lug so much everywhere. The man stares at the bones and demands, "Is this really all that's left of a dragon?" Alfred nods, a cold yes on his lips. A cold bolt of realization slams into him. Some people really do worship dragons as gods, maybe the elder is one of them. He crumples into an apology, insisting they were undead and he had no choice. The man snaps, that's not the case at all. He grins and proclaims Alfred simply amazing, stunned that the boy had just slain so many dragons in one night. He thunders that Alfred is the undisputed guardian of the village of Merg, and the boy bursts into laughter before thanking the man for the praise. Millet cut them off and declared it true. The elder had been absolutely right. Alfred was downright amazing. Alfred shot Millet a grateful nod. Vivi snapped, "What are you even talking about? I did most of the work." Alfred can't imagine anyone but a mighty warband or a handful of battle-hardened veterans, like that young man, capable of slaughtering so many dragons. The elder barked at him never to overdo it. He warned that meeting a dragon almost always means death. Alfred replied that he understood and would be more careful. The elder leaned in and about the warehouse, declared he'd found a plot of land outside the village the young man could claim and use as he pleased. Alfred practically vibrates with excitement. "This is just wonderful, we'll build a warehouse right there." Moments later, the battle-ready young man erupts into casting, unleashing a surge of raw magic. He asks the men if they remember he can conjure the foundation and stitch the assembly with magic, only so far, and tells them to come to him if anything goes wrong. Alfred smirked and insisted magicians really did have it easier with carnal pleasures, and the man hauling the board nodded, grunting that the young man was right. They hammered and hauled with the carpenters for 3 brutal days, and at last Alfred's warehouse stood finished. Alfred gaped and declared the interior amazing. Vivi's magic hadn't just made it strong, it held far more than anyone would have guessed. Vivi declared it the hand of a master. This wasn't the reckless battlefield magic a young man blusters with. She had to trace a flawless, elegant magic circle. Vivi threw the suggestion at the boy, "Maybe you should be a carpenter," and Alfred snapped that the girl fought too. Vivi slams her hand down, voice like steel. "This is where they'll keep all their valuables guarded." The boy asks if that's really necessary. Vivi nods firm yes. She smirks, winks, and proclaims she's got it all planned. Alfred shoots back, "Is that true?" The next day, Vivi dove into a book about magic circles, and Alfred leaned in to ask the girl why she'd suddenly gone so shy. Vivi smirked, locked eyes with the boy, and dared him to watch as she executed every move with flawless, razor-sharp skill. Millet burst into the room, shouting Alfred's name, and the girl spun to the young man, asking if he'd come help her gather herbs. Alfred shot back a quick yes, no objections, and Millet thanked the young man, then announced it was time for them to go. Fem barked, "I'm coming too." Alfred turned to Vivi and pressed her to join, but Vivi shook her head. She was busy preparing something. Moments later, the young man snaps, "Do you smell that?" And Millet sniffs, nods, and admits he's right. Millet wrinkles her nose and snaps that the herbs they're hunting reek, then shoves a rag at the young man and orders him to clamp it over his nose. Millet announces she's heading out. Alfred agrees, then, in an instant, Fem starts sniffing and Alfred's voice snaps, "Are you okay?" Fem swoons that the air here smells unbelievably good and strong. Alfred fumbles that he doesn't know if humans and wolves smell differently, then blurts, "Why are you sniffing me?" He snaps at Fem to stop doing that. Millet rushes over and says she's done. Alfred laughs that it was quick. The girl shrugs, "I only needed a little." The young man then urged the girl to hurry and get ready. Suddenly, a hand snatched at Alfred's cloak, and someone asked to borrow it for a minute. Shock ripped through Alfred. He felt no presence, yet someone had stepped impossibly close without him noticing, and the realization crashed in. He wasn't ordinary. Millet whirls around and snaps, "You need anything." The stranger hesitates and admits, "I'm a little lost." He leans in and asks if Alfred and Millet know where the village of Merg is. The stranger's smile twists into a cold, knowing curl that makes your skin crawl. The hero's team, a squad of 4 S-class adventurers who obliterated the Demon King once and for all. Alfred, a battle-hardened mage who cracks the sky with his spells. Luca, a wise warrior whose instincts cut through chaos. Juliana, a priceless healer who stitches life back together. And Hero Cards, a genius blessed by the Holy Spirit. Alfred stands baffled, clueless why he's here, but one thing slams into him. He has to change his voice first. He'll drag him out by force if he has to, and it's going to get ugly. Kurds barreled up and demanded what had happened to the young man, and Alfred's voice slipped into a strange, hollow tone as he insisted, nothing happened. Kurds fidgets blurting, have we met before? And Alfred just shakes his head, no, I don't think so. Kurt blurts, we've met before, and Alfred's pulse spikes as suspicion flares in the boy's eyes. Confusion claws at him. He can't figure out what's wrong or how to fool Kurtz until a memory sparks. He turns away, a plan forming, and thinks, this should work. He whips around, a bristling beard on his face, and announces the boy said he was looking for the village of Merg, says they can show him the way, and grins that he still has a bushy beard for the party. Stunned and flushed with embarrassment, Kurtz begged the boys to look after him. Alfred grinned, pleased that Kurtz was so naive. Confusion clouded Millet. She urged they go home, and when she called Alfred by his nickname, he snapped that his name was Rawl. The boy blurts to Kurtz that her name is Millet. She reels in surprise, and Alfred spins to her, pressing, isn't that true? Millet startles and Alfred thanks her with a relieved smile. Later he apologizes to Kurtz for making him trudge while Alfred rides his pet. Kurtz, nursing an injured leg, shrugs it off and says he doesn't mind. The girl declared, Millet, I'm from the village of Merg. Alfred replied, Rao, and the young man bowed, gratitude blazing as he thanked them for their kindness. The girl declares her name, Cruz Condoran. He's come to slay the undead dragons overrunning this area. Millet froze and whirled to Alfred, who snapped that it was utterly terrible and jabbed a finger straight at her. Curse swears it's true. Undead dragons were spawned by a dark mage, probably one of the demon lord's surviving soldiers, and Alfred is gripped by dread over that mage. Kurt snaps, don't worry, we've already taken care of them. They carved out a base in the western cities, and the young man starts crowing that he found them. Ordered to attack the royal table, the undead dragons descended to annihilate the mages. Alfred's certain, draw a straight line from the western mountains to the royal capital, and it slices straight through the Fem forest, right into the village of Merg. He felt the truth hammer in his chest. Every dragon was already dead, but he couldn't find the words to tell him. Kurt declared he'd skip the main event to stay and protect the village of Merg, and Millet said that was encouraging. Alfred's throat tightens. He can't bring himself to tell the boy the village guards already eliminated the dragons, and he can't admit the threat is over. Millet beams, astonished that Kirst is surprisingly skilled for his age and shockingly strong. Kirst shrugs and credits it to relentless training. They reach the village and Alfred's breath catches at how strangely alive it is, then his gaze snaps to something. A young man shrieks that his house has been burned to the ground. Alfred yanks a resident and demands what's happening, and the man spits out that a stranger attacked him while Vivi leapt in to protect him. Vivi sprang to her feet to find a girl standing before her. Kurtz recognized her as Luca. The girl drew her sword while Vivi summoned magic into her hands. A young man planted himself between them, but Lucas coldly sent him away. Vivi flew at Alfred with an apology, saying she'd tried to stop her, but the girl had snapped. A bolt of dread hit Alfred. Maybe Vivi had torched the house, or the girl unleashed combat magic and blew it to pieces. He gaped, shocked the hero, and the warrior stood together, then dropped to his knees, begging Luca's forgiveness and insisting the girl might be a demon but not a wicked one, while she shrugged and said she didn't care if she was a demon. Luca screamed that Vivi was crafting a giant undead bowl, and Vivi snapped that it was just a skeleton. She spat that this wasn't a place for strange people who couldn't even spot the difference between a normal skeleton and the undead, and Lucas roared that the circle was huge. Alfred finally pieced it together. No wonder Vivi was desperate. She frantically tried to resurrect Muffy as a skeleton and ordered him to stand guard over the warehouse. Luca insisted she'd done the right thing, tearing that magic circle apart. It was a real monster. Rage tore through Vivi as she screamed at the girl to take back those words and never, ever call Muffy a monster. Alfred said that, from what he knows, some countries march to war with dragon and human skeletons, and he shrugged that a human skeleton was hardly different from an ox's. When the dead souls are defiled, they flare into skeletons, their souls fleeting and chained to their original owners, and some of those skeletons even fight at human sides as partners. Lucas roared it might be true. Residents cut her off, shouting that Vivi wasn't bad and insisting the girl was young yet already had a rotten streak. This city was a terrible place. Cruz cut in and demanded, "Luca, what's going on?" The girl grinned. Cruz had split from the others without warning, and since she was already here, none of it mattered now. Luca jabbed a finger at Vivi and thundered, "She's the fifth of the four heavenly kings of the Demon King's army, and now that she's landed in a place like this, they must kill her." Alfred's gut screamed danger. When did this supposed fifth of the four heavenly kings shoot up to fame? Luca declared, eyes blazing, that as the last heavenly king she would resurrect the Demon King's army, and atop the colossal bull, storm the imperial capital. Cruz snaps into action. It's time to clean up the place. Alfred reels. The situation is just awful. Warrior Luca is the team's brains. He can't even fathom the raw power it hides, and he won't even mention Krug, a heroine chosen by God. They'd be doomed the moment a fight erupted. Alfred pleaded with them to wait and begged for a chance to speak. At that moment, Vivi shook free of his grip, shielded her, and lunged forward. Alfred shouted that this was just madness. Without warning, the village kids surged forward, forming a living shield of tiny hands over Vivi, as they cried she wasn't bad and begged everyone not to touch her. Vivi choked back tears and thanked the children. Cruz jolted in surprise, then softened with feeling. She declared that if the children insisted, Lucas should leave Vivi, and the girl gaped. Cruz snapped her sword shut and sprinted to the children. Alfred, unsurprised, knew she wasn't exactly kind-hearted but went soft around kids, and she suggested they play together. Her carefree grin fools everyone into thinking she's an easy target, but he's dead certain Luca won't back down, and the girl let out a defeated sigh, saying it seemed there was nothing to be done. Alfred's voice cracked as they begged, every word pouring from the bottom of their hearts. Luca's insisted all they'd asked was to keep their skeletal bowl. Vivi exhaled and said she understood. Luca's smile trembled as she beckoned the magician with the fake beard over. The young man sidled up, flashing an awkward grin as he greeted her. They reached the boys' barn. Alfred whipped around to the warrior and asked what she wanted. Then the girl suddenly slammed her hand down inches from the boy's head. She smirks and challenges the girl. "You really think I'm that stupid?" The boy immediately apologizes to her. Luca scoffed, a touching reunion. Alfred pressed the girl. "When did you realize it was me?" Luca snapped she'd known the moment Cruz unsheathed her sword, and the boy was even toying with yanking off his fake beard. Alfred said, stunned, that he hadn't been discovered. Luca agreed, admitting they hadn't discovered him right away. His voice sounded different, and the girl sliced through the moment to ask how the boy's knee was. Alfred shot back that everything was fine and that the village of Merg even had a healing onsen. Luca's nodded, said she understood, so everything was fine. Alfred flashed a grin, asked, "Were you really worried about me?" and thanked her. Luca went crimson, blurted, "Why?" and as always knew her reaction had just betrayed her. Alfred barked, "How are things in the royal capital?" then fell silent and walked away. Luca snapped, "Was the boy really worried about it just now?" and she shot back, "How much trouble do you think you've caused me?" Luca's shrugged, she didn't even object. The young man accepted the Adventurers Guild's request. She kept it secret from everyone, and once she took the royal capital's general manager post, the whole thing was a snap for him. A young man boasted that her sudden career surge was why no one had tracked him down yet. Luca had been pulling strings for him behind the scenes the whole time, and he owed her a proper thank you. Alfred burst out that he was in the village. She snapped that she already knew everything and hadn't come to see him. The boy blurted, "Could the dragon be behind this?" Luca confirmed with a hard nod, and Alfred snarled that it was also meant to finish off the survivors of the Demon King's army. Luca snapped, "Hold on a minute, that's confidential," then leaned in and demanded, "How did you find out?" Alfred snapped he'd asked Cruz. Luca scoffed, calling her stupid and saying the girl would deal with it later. She warned about an undead dragon, not a mere corpse drake but a titanic undead horror. Dozens of lesser ones swarm the land, and that spells disaster. She says she'll have to ask the young man for help. Alfred snaps they've already taken care of him, then he throws open the warehouse door. Luca's snapped that she had just shown up like that. The boy confirmed it really happened that way. Then the girl gasped that it was the fang of a lower dragon. The girl blurts, "About 20 of them are here." Alfred snaps, "That's absolutely true." Luca leans in and asks, "Wasn't that brutal for the boy?" Alfred says Vivi and Fem helped him, and Luca's mind snaps to one of the four heavenly kings of the Demon King's army. Cruz shouted to Luca through the window, "How long will she be here?" then stormed into the warehouse and froze in shock as Luca added that, apparently, the work here was already finished. Alfred reveals his beard and declares they've been apart for ages. Cruz's jaw drops. This old man was Alfred all along, and Alfred confesses he'd been haunted by doubts about whether she'd trust him. Cruz barreled out, "What are you doing here? You're always on the move," and they traded stories for hours. Cruz blurts that the boy came to the village to heal his knee, and Alfred lunges at Luca, snarling, Why did the girl lie to her? Lucas insisted that if she'd told the truth, she'd have followed her without hesitation, and Cruz shrugged, calling it natural. She'd go to the ends of the earth for Alfred. Bruce even toyed with moving to Merg village. She'd train with Alfred and come back stronger, only for the young man to snap that it absolutely couldn't happen while he was still recovering. Luca cut them off, snapping that she'd already warned Krug if the hero walks away from his duty, countless people will be left in danger. Alfred warned that if the hero left the royal capital, worry would sweep the streets and rumors would spread like wildfire, but he promised they could always slip in here and hang out safely whenever they wanted. Peru vows she'll heed Alfred if he says so, and the young man grins, saying that means the two of them can stay the night. He freezes, stares at his house and says, I completely forgot it burned down, and the crew says they'll all set up camp together. Lucas declared she'd probably hold off. Alfred immediately sided with Luke, and the village of Merg suddenly looked poised to liven up. Luca leaned in and asked why Cruz loved living in tents so much. Crew flashed a grin and said, it's a blast, while nearby Alfred's comrades watched them, wondering what they were talking about. Luca sank into a low bow and apologized, voice cracking, as she confessed she was terribly sorry for the inconvenience. Villagers gasped and the elders smiled, soft and sweet. Alfred roared at the villagers to listen, declaring these men his friends, no, his former allies, vouching they're trustworthy and riddled with regret, and begging the crowd to forgive them. Lucas said the instant she spotted that towering magic circle, she swore she'd stop it even if it cost her everything. The men smiled sweetly, shrugged, and said these things happen. The village chief beckoned Luca to lift his chin. Alfred's friends beamed, thrilled to welcome guests into their village, and Alfred forced an awkward smile. Lucas exhaled in relief and thanked the village chief. Cruz grinned and said, that's so cool. Lucas spun toward her, a murderous aura crackling around him. Cruz snapped at the girl, demanding why she stared at him so carelessly. Lucas slammed an arm around him and shoved him forward, barking for her to go and apologize for pulling out her sword. Alfred's brain buzzed with one cold truth. He still hadn't revealed Luca and Cruz's true identities. If word leaked that they were the hero and warrior who'd subdued the Demon King, they'd be catapulted into prominence. The villagers would burn with shame, and the two would despise the spotlight. The village elder whirled to Alfred and demanded to know his plans for the day. Alfred, staring at the smoldering shell of his home, figured he'd spend the night in the barn with everyone else. The village elder bellowed he'd never let the young man or their prized guests through, and Alfred scoffed, don't worry about me. Millet cut in and insisted they stay with his family until their house was completely rebuilt. The elder beamed. Millet's home was enormous. Alfred leaned in and demanded, are you sure? Millet flashed a confident smile and shot back, more than sure. Alfred snarled that she'd exploit her position. Colette beamed as she walked beside Cruz. He shot her a curious look and asked, what's got you in such a good mood? Cruz practically buzzed, declaring she was dying to spend the night at Colette's house. The girl smiled and said she was counting down the hours too. They burst through the door and into the house. Luca implores the host to take care of them. Millet waves them in, urging them to make themselves at home. Alfred sneered they were freeloaders, so they could ask them to do something. Millet waved him in, grinning, don't be shy, come in. Moments later, Colette swept Femi into a tight hug and urged her to come have fun together. Alfred spun to Luca and demanded what was wrong with their doctor and why there were only two of them. Luca said Giuliana had caught the mumps. Lucas warned an epidemic was tearing through the capital. She'd even been struck by it while treating others. Alfred urged the girls to pass on his best wishes to Giuliana. Luca and Cruz thanked the young man. Millet, tray in hand, strode up and demanded if Luca and Cruz were really Alfred's friends. Cruz nodded, admitted he'd fooled them with a disguise, and the whole place exploded in laughter. The boy spat something and whipped his gaze to Vivi, hunched and hiding in the doorway, while Alfred barked, why didn't you join us? Vivi spat that the warrior had stopped her from reviving Muffy, and Luca bowed his head, apologizing to the girl once more. Shame flamed across Vivi's face as she confessed, voice trembling, that Alfred's house burned down because of her, and she begged him to forgive her. Alfred spun to Vivi and snapped that there was nothing to fear. Even if she'd failed, he'd ordered the fire, so he urged the girl to return to Muffy tomorrow. Vivi's cheeks burned as she sank onto a chair at the table. Lucas sneered that she couldn't really tell a zombie from a skeleton by their magic circle. She confessed she was guilty, but vowed she'd have torn the Demon King's 4 heavenly kings to pieces if they'd tried to resurrect the dead, and Alfred said Luca was right. He'd pegged Luca as a warrior, then she casually deciphered a magic circle and blew his mind. He cuts Luca and Cruz off, declaring he needs to clear something up, and the girls gasp, leaning in to hang on his every word. Alfred blurted out whether Vivi was really one of the 4 heavenly kings, and Luca recoiled, eyes wide, snapping, You're asking that right now. Vivi snapped, demanding how many more times she'd have to repeat herself. Lucas snarled, have you forgotten how we fought her last time? Alfred recoiled, horrified that he actually thought she was a brat. Cruz flashed a brilliant smile and admitted she'd forgotten too, so the young man didn't have to worry, while Alfred's chest tightened as conflicting emotions surged through him. Luke swore the moment their boots hit the Demon King's land, they stormed in and seized a tiny fortress. Vivi seemed to be there, but they swarmed her and pinned her down. The boy snapped, what are you doing here? And Vivi said she was tending the soil and the livestock. The Demon King's lands have turned to dust. The army sped up its assault, hell-bent on looting the people for supplies. If Vivi hadn't wrested the situation back under control, the battle would have been brutal. Vivi scoffed that the boy was simply lucky to have defeated her first. It was sheer, staggering luck. Colette beamed that kings are totally cool. Alfred fixed his gaze on the girl and declared she radiated brazen confidence, a brilliant magician, even when she pulled reckless, boneheaded stunts. A mouthwatering scent slammed into the girl. She blurted it smelled amazing just as Millet announced she'd finished cooking. Thanks thundered at the girl as the crew whooped. Finally, they could dive into the healthy feast Millet had prepared. Cruz tore into the pancake, eyes lighting up as he declared it absolutely fantastic, and Lucas sliced through the quiet with one sharp question. Why was the girl alone in the forest? Cruz shot back that she'd found a strange trail and followed it, then suddenly lost Luca. Luca said the girl had gotten lost, just following what they thought was the hydra's trail. Alfred demanded what she meant by the hydra, and Vivi snapped, it's a lethal monster, don't underestimate it. The hydra rears a writhing crown of heads, each dripping lethal venom, and its raw power rivals a dragon's. Lucas snapped that Cruz was wrong. She'd scoured the road and found no trace of the hydra. Cruz, voice like iron, insisted it was a hydra. Alfred suspected Cruz was off-kilter, but her instincts never lied. A young man vowed he'd help the girl if Cruz found her, and Cruz pressed him to explain why he cared. Plates cleared, Millet flashed a grin and announced they'd go to the hot springs. Cruz scoffed, do you even have hot springs? Lucas's eyes sparked, she wanted in, and Millet vowed she'd take them there right now. Millet flashed a fierce smile and vowed to Alfred, Vivi, and Femi she'd be back soon. Don't rush or worry. She and Femi would stay to hold the line. Cruz yanked Alfred close, declaring they'd gone ages without bathing together. Alfred recoiled and snapped that he didn't need it and would stay home. Cruz wrinkled her nose and demanded to know if the young man was seriously skipping the hot springs just because he smelled of sweat. Millet shuddered and Alfred, fresh from swimming with Cruz, blurted out, have you two ever been together? Alfred snorted, if this is bathing, I'm a traveler, confessing he sometimes had to shove off his shyness and scrub himself quick. This, he snapped, was something else. They were traveling, so it was routine. Millet fumed she couldn't believe it, and Vivi sneered that travelers were shameless. Luca yanked Alfred and Cruz apart, snapping that they were no longer on the road and that mixed swimming was unacceptable. Cruz insisted it'd be way more fun if everyone stuck together. Luca cringed and snapped that Cruz needed to understand how embarrassing it was. The girls streamed away. Alfred called after them, wishing them a wonderful time, and Cruz winced as she said she was very sorry Alfred wasn't going with them. After a while, the young man walked beside Femi, beaming. Those hot springs were amazing today, then looked up at the sky and realized the moon would be full tonight. After some time, the young man returns. Millet meets him and announces dinner is almost ready, and Alfred thanks the girl. Alfred storms into the room to find Vivi hunched at the table, sketching magic circles on paper, while Lucas and Cruz are locked in a card game and Colette watches them. The girls beckon the young man into a card game, and Alfred's sweet smile blossomed as a gentle peace settled in his chest. They tore into a card game while Millet simmered on the stove, then waited hungrily for dinner to finish, and at last everyone sprang into clearing up and washed the dishes together. Night had already fallen. Alfred scrambled up the stairs, cradling the sleeping Colette as he carried her to bed, and Millet called out that she'd already made the beds and there were only 2 rooms. Colette reached for Femi and promised she'd sleep beside her. Millet barged in, insisting she and Colette would sleep on the floor so the guests could have the bed. Alfred snapped he wouldn't allow it. Grateful the girl let them stay, he still forbade anyone from using her bed. Millet shrugged and said there was nothing wrong with that. Alfred backed him up, saying he thought it was right, and Cruz froze, turning the idea over in his mind. She barreled into the boys, blurted she'd sleep on the floor, then locked onto Alfred and asked. He blinked, wondering why she was asking him. Cruz snaps she really can't do that. The boy insists it's not that she can't, so Cruz hauls him over and growls, fine, then we're sleeping here. She drops to the floor and confesses it's been ages since she slept beside Alfred. He meets her words with a quiet, knowing nod. Smiles lit their faces. Alfred declared they'd covered for each other on the trip and slept in shifts, and Cruz chimed that the floor felt even more comfortable. Lucas dropped onto the seat beside them and proclaimed she was with them. Moments later, Vivi burst in, grinning that it looked like a blast, and telling Femi she could sleep alone. Millet snapped that no one would ever lie in the bed she'd painstakingly prepared, and as mistress of the house, she'd call every shot for them. At last, Fem, Colette, and her landed the bed while the others snatched the rest. Alfred piped up that it might be cramped, and Millet shrugged, saying it was fine, they'd already agreed on everything. Vivi snarled that, no matter what Millet said, she'd still hit her that night, and Millet squirmed and awkwardly blurted she hadn't done that. After a while, Colette and Alfred crashed into bed. Colette stroked Fem and murmured that she always slept peacefully right beside Fem. They murmured sweet dreams and drifted towards sleep, but Alfred lay awake, haunted by the thought the hydra had appeared here too. He clenched his jaw and vowed the village would be safe under his watch. At that moment, somewhere deep in the forest, a hydra slithered through the underbrush and ripped the silence with a bone-rattling howl. After a while, the guard's shift kicks off as he flings open the main gate. The young man cracks his shoulders and exhales, suddenly barking rips through the air, and he and Femi hear it. They spun around and found tiny puppies tumbling at their feet. Alfred chirped "Good morning," asked where their parents were, and Fem guessed they'd gone off to catch their breakfast. The moment they rebuilt Alfred's house, several wolves moved in nearby. He's certain the leftover scraps lured them. Vivi cut them off mid-sentence and begged Alfred to help her cast a resurrection spell for Muffy. Alfred nodded and said he'd help. Suddenly, Luca and Cruz burst in, grinning, and confessed they were in on it too, and Vivi snapped that they'd been secretly trailing her the whole time. Vivi snapped, "Are you really going to bother me again?" And Luca returned a single, unwavering word, "No." Luca snapped that she'd already apologized, and if she was going to help, demanding anything in return made no sense, they'd only be looking. Alfred barked that they'd eat first, the Millets waiting, then brusquely sent the girls away and insisted every scrap of business would be handled only after the meal. Alfred asks Vivi if she minds them all going to see him. Vivi replies she can't say no when he asks. After a beat, he geared up and tailed Vivi, who warned she'd only sketched 80% of the magic circle. Last time those two barged in, and she had to rip the whole thing apart. He jabbed a finger at the spot and demanded, "Does she really work there?" Vivi snaps back, "Yes, what's wrong with that?" Alfred explodes, shouting it's dangerous to work in the middle of the village because the villagers might get scared. Vivi grinned and declared the boy was right, then announced she'd finally prepared it for Alfred to see. Desperate for everyone to be overjoyed by Muffy's resurrection, she couldn't tell what the boy was thinking. Cruz barreled up to Vivi, laid a steady hand on her shoulder, and declared everything was fine. She understood her, and then told her not to lose heart, reminding her that Lucas scolds her every single day. Alfred ruffled Vivi's hair, swore this time he'd watch her from the very beginning, and urged the girl to go to a bigger place. The girl is plotting to surprise everyone. Vivi flushes with embarrassment and sides with the boy. Then the girl flails her hands, begging him to stop petting her. Her cheeks flamed as she snapped at the boy to watch where he put his hand. Vivi pressed the girls again, asking if they'd really bother her, and Luca shot back that they will not bother her. She rockets into the field as Alfred calls from the sidelines that he'll watch from here. She nods, bolts off, then spins back to flash a quick, grinning wave at the boy. Vivid's grin flared as he began sketching a crackling magic circle, and Alfred asked, "Is it really that incredible?" Luca leans in, voice sharp, "Is something wrong?" Alfred shrugs and beams, "Nothing's wrong, it's simply amazing." Luca paused, mind racing, eyes glued to Vivi as she traced a colossal magic circle. Minutes slipped away. Cruz barreled around with Femi and shouted for her to fetch the ball. Vivi, sweat beading on her brow, snapped at Alfred to inspect her magic circle, and the young man, already sitting on the ground, gave a quick nod of agreement. The boy's grin exploded as he blurted, "I love that, I never would have thought of it," and Vivi's giggle spilled out. Alfred watched Vivi linger over each deliberate stroke of the intricate magic circle and felt, with a sharp certainty, that she towered over him in skill. His gravity magic will fuse the bones together. Every last preparation locks into place. Vivi barked for everyone to fall back until she's finished. Vivi slammed her palms onto the magic seal and clamped her eyes shut. As she unleashed the spell, Muffy's bones snapped and slid into place, reassembling his skeleton. Luca and Cruz clamped their hands over their faces against the savage wind, frozen in stunned disbelief at what was unfolding. Alfred's jaw dropped as the realization hit. Muffy had no vocal cords, yet she summoned sound from pure spiritual energy, and it blew him away, so he shouted to Vivi that it worked. Vivi sobbed, calling for Muffy as a girl sprinted straight to him. Alfred thundered, "Stop, don't go there." Vivi screamed, "I don't know how to make this right," then turned to Muffy, begged forgiveness for hurting her, and insisted she was truly, deeply sorry. She screams at Muffy, voice raw and fierce, "If you can't forgive me, take your revenge right now." Vivi keeps her gaze locked on Muffy. Luca ripped his sword free while Alfred sparked roaring magic, and the young man's heart slammed shut. Even if Vivi was willing, he couldn't let her die in front of her. Suddenly Muffy nuzzled Vivi's cheek. Vivi whispered, "Do you really forgive me?" And Muffy answered with a bright, joyful hum. Vivi burst into tears of joy and wiped them frantically. Alfred's blood ran cold. Muffy seemed to have forgiven Vivi, even though he was the one who'd killed her. Muffy spun toward the boy and unhinged her jaw. Cruz and Luca gaped as the boy's body slid into Muffy's skull. The girls barreled up to Alfred, breathless and frantic, asking if he was okay, and Alfred grinned, shrugging that Muffy had only bitten him a little. The boy swept Muffy into his arms, breathless as he thanked her for coming back to them. Alfred, Vivi, and Femi piled in, laughing as they showered her with happy pats. After some time, returning to the village, the women demanded to know if the rumors were true, and there it stood, a colossal skeletal bowl. Alfred blurted an apology and insisted the skeleton posed no threat, so no one should worry. The woman gaped, admitting she'd never seen bones move and yelling that necromancy was awesome. They reached the pen and Vivi plants her feet, declaring, "This is Muffy's new home, I want her to stay." Muffy's legs suddenly gave out. Vivi snatched her up, voice steady and fierce, promising she'd always be there. If Muffy stayed close, everything would be fine. The puppies burst in. Alfred snapped, "Why are they still here?" And Fem declared the whole scene utterly bizarre. Cruz leaned in and asked what skeletons eat, and Alfred shot back that since they lack a digestive system, they survive on only a sliver of spiritual energy. Vivi nodded, admitting the truth. Their bodies were born of magic and survive on it. Cruz said she understood, then shot a question. Wasn't it tough for Vivi with Muffy so huge? Vivi warned it was a tangled mess. She wasn't the only one channeling spiritual energy into Muffy's body, and Cruz nodded, saying she understood. The puppy erupts into a desperate howl as Alfred yells, "Fam, what's going on?" And the she-wolf snaps that the wolves have found a hydra. A crooked smirk tugged Alfred's lips as he announced the hydra had finally appeared. Cruz whipped her blade free, and Alfred felt the cold certainty. He had no choice but to fight. Cruz smirked and vowed she wouldn't let the trail slip away again. This time she'd see it through. Alfred panicked and held up a hand and asked her to calm down a bit, and Cruz nodded. Alfred whirled to Fem, but the wolf snapped that she already knew. Fem dropped the wolf's skin, revealed her true form, and declared protecting the forest was her duty. Alfred whirled to Vivi and barked that she had to stay put in case the village was attacked. Vivi gave a sharp nod and vowed she and Muffy would keep watch. Alfred vaulted onto Fem, shouted for Luca and Cruz, asked the girls if they were ready. Luca and Cruz nodded, and they tore off. Pushing deep into the forest, Femi unleashed a raw howl and strained to catch the answering calls. The she-wolf pointed Alfred toward the right path and tore off straight there. Suddenly, Alfred's eyes locked onto a colossal hydra. Luca's blurted that it was even bigger than she thought, and Alfred warned the girls to be careful because the hydra is poisonous. Cruz surged screaming, barreling straight at the hydra, and Alfred barked at the girl to stop. "Don't dive in headlong." Krug storms into battle fearless and fierce, but at times her recklessness plunges her into danger. They owe it to her to stand by her. The boy conjured a blinding pillar of light above the hydra. It clamped its heads over its eyes, and the Cruzasword cleaved every head from their necks. Hydra slammed a vial and drenched Cruz in a strange liquid, and the girl frantically wiped it off, gagging as she cried that it gave off a horrible, nauseating stench. A hand yanked the girl by the collar and slammed her out of the way. Cruz snapped at Luca, "What are you doing?" as the hydra's head barreled past Cruz. Luca severed her head, sneering that they'd warned the girl about the poison, then taunted, "Were you really that tired of living?" The girls screamed as the hydra's severed heads regrew. Luca hacked at them again and shouted, "This hydra is behaving abnormally." Alfred watched them, and Luca's warning slammed into him as truth. Hydras need 3 days to regenerate, so this blistering regrowth was unmistakably unnatural. Alfred spun to Luca and Cruz and barked at the girls to keep chopping off her heads. An idea had just struck him. He snarls he'll try to scorch her with his fire magic and orders them to hold out until then. Cruz shoots back, "We got the message." Luca snaps at Alfred to hurry. She can't hold out much longer. Cruz taunts that the fun's starting, but Luca cuts her off, snarling she won't listen to someone covered in poison. Alfred barks for Fem to circle the hydra. She snaps the squad back into formation and charges forward to carry it out. Alfred thrusts his arm out and impales the hydra with a roaring spear of fire, and Cruz and Luca stand agape, stunned it actually worked. Cruz beamed at Alfred, declaring it was perfect. Luca snapped at her not to relax, and Cruz nodded fiercely, insisting they'd win now that she can't hold back. Luca shouted for Alfred to cover her back. Alfred grinned, agreed, and vowed they'd finish off these heads. Femi's eyes locked on Alfred, and the truth slammed into him. This was the full might of Alfred's team. With the hydra reduced to rubble, everyone let out a long, relieved exhale. Femi's jaw dropped. Alfred's group was shockingly powerful. Alfred whooped it worked, they'd pulled it off. Then Cruz's nostrils flared at a mouthwatering aroma, and Luca blurted, "Am I the only one who smells fried fish?" Yet the scent was unmistakably fried hydra. Cruz's voice sliced the air. "Is that true?" Luca's thundered, "She's inedible." Suddenly a sharp bark ripped through the silence. Alfred spotted the adult wolves, hailed them too for a job well done, and thanked them for tracking down the hydra. It made their whole mission so much easier. The boy thanks Femi. Femi bristles and pouts, spots the wolves drooling and snaps, "Do you really want to eat the hydra?" Cruz snapped she hadn't touched the hydra yet, but Lucas bellowed for the wolves to devour the hydra. Femi blurts, "Can we eat the hydra?" Alfred grins, nods, and says he doesn't mind. Alfred shrugs it off, insisting it's hardly harmful. Luca's eyes snap open and he blurts, "Have you ever tried hydra?" Alfred shrugged that he'd done it once when he was younger, for science. The truth was he just felt like it. Cruz told Luca it was okay. Pruss drooled that it looked outrageously crispy and delicious, and Alfred warned the girl it tasted utterly bland. Luca's blood runs cold as wolves yap, and the crew screams they'll share. Then Cruz steps forward and offers herself to Alfred to be butchered. Luca fell silent for a heartbeat, then snapped, "I'll return first." Alfred's jaw dropped. After some time the hydramit sizzled to a char. Wolves lunged and tore into it. Cruz swarmed after them to join the feast, and Alfred watched, mouth watering. Seeing Cruz and the others eat meat like that looked downright delicious. After dinner they snagged their trophies and marched home, Luca crowing that she'd lucked into valuable ingredients, a roaring success. Luca nudged Alfred and asked if they could hit the hot springs when they got back to the village, and Alfred grinned, saying it was a great idea. Cruz doubled over with a sharp wince and cried out in pain. Luca lunged forward, asking about the girl's condition, and Cruz clutched her stomach, saying it hurt. Alfred's voice cracked with disbelief. "Cruz sick. Strong warriors like her rarely get sick." Luca's shot back, "It's all because of the hydra." She leaned in and asked the girl if she could walk. Cruz said she could, but only slowly, and Alfred seized Cruz by the shoulder and snapped at the girl not to tire herself. She'd ride them. Cruz snapped she was fine. The stomach pain wouldn't break her. Alfred admitted he thought she was about to faint. Alfred pleaded with Fem to let him go with Cruz, the she-wolf and queen of the wolves, then shouted for the girls to hurry and told Cruz to hold on tight. They headed home. Cruz grabbed Alfred to thank him, and the young man, after tasting the hydramit and convinced by his own experience it was tasty and not poisonous, felt a sick certainty that something here was unclean. They burst into Millet's house and tell the girl Cruz is doubled over with a stomachache. Millet snaps it's serious and hustles to make up the bed right away. At last they tuck Cruz into bed, and the girl bows her head to apologize to Millet for disturbing her. Khalid snaps, "Cruz, are you okay?" Cruz forces a grateful, "Thank you for your work," and Millet presses the girl, "What unusual food did you eat?" Luca blurted she'd eaten the hydra's meat. A girl lunged to stop her, but snarled she shouldn't bother hiding her stupidity. Cruz announced that Fem ate too. Alfred insisted he thought Fem was okay because she was a wolf. Millet blurted that, according to Alfred, hydra meat isn't poisonous. It vents every toxin in the fury of battle, so maybe traces of those poisons lingered in the meat she ate. Millet promised she'd whip up a stomach remedy and hand him an antidote just in case. She could make it for the young man if he wanted, but he'd have to wait. Minutes later, Millet bursts back with the medicine. Alfred beams and hails him as a true master. Millet thanks the young man. Cruz downed the potion and snapped that it was vile and reeked. Millet shot back that it was medicine, and Cruz forced another swallow, gagging as the bitterness burned. Lucas stormed up to Cruz and demanded, "How much more will you drink?" Then pinched Cruz's nose and poured the medicine into our open mouth. Alfred's voice soared as he told Cruz she'd done well. Luca jabbed it would keep her away from the hydramit. Cruz suddenly cried out that the medicine seemed to be working. Luca scoffed that was impossible. She brushed off the worry, insisting it didn't matter. She had to lie down and rest, and she'd stay with her for a while. Cruz flops back down, then springs up a heartbeat later, insisting she's better. Lucas snaps she can't get better that fast and tells her to lie down. Cruz bolts to her feet again, shouting she's better, absolutely sure, and 10 minutes later Alfred realizes it was a terrible mistake to ever think she was a normal person. Relief crashed over Millet as she watched Cruz, Khalida, and Fem frolicking, and she had Alfred to thank. Millet stretches, flashes a wide grin, and exclaims, "The country air is so refreshing today." Alfred, towering and grinning, proclaims that Millet is right. while Colette, Cruz, and Fem tumble and laugh on the sunlit grass. Deep in the forest, a tiny rabbit stumbled onto a hydra's severed head and darted straight up to it. He gulped a strange liquid pouring straight from the hydra's jaw, then a searing, sharp pain lanced through the rabbit, and he crumpled to the ground. A short while later, Vivi tended to Muffy, and still breathless from their frantic dash home, turned to Alfred and asked if everything was okay. Alfred agreed and declared Cruz was in critical condition, so they rushed her to Millet, while Cruz screamed she was already perfectly fine. Alfred announced they'd slain the Hydra and that everyone was safe. Vivi grinned, said that was good, then promptly claimed the victory. She'd done it. She burst into a grin and declared it was all thanks to the village guards Vivi and Muffy that they could fight in peace. Alfred patted Vivi on the head, proclaimed she was unquestionably the best guard, then thanked her for her hard work. Vivi blurted that Muffy wanted to be petted too, and Colette and Cruz dove at Muffy, screaming they loved her to pieces. Colette ran her hand over Muffy's fur, marveling at how silk-smooth she was. Alfred nodded, insisting it was true, and Cruz laughed, adding that Muffy was absolutely lovely. Cruz's palms suddenly flared with an eerie light. Alfred jabbed a finger and demanded, "What's that glow, girl?" Cruz just blinks. She's clueless because she's busy petting Muffy. Vivi's panic erupted. She screamed at Cruz to stop, accusing her of doing something wrong. Luca lunged, grabbed Vivi, and snapped for her to back off. Cruz hadn't done anything wrong. Vivi demanded to know what was going on here. Luca answered it might be the sanctification of the brave. Then a colossal stream of light tore through the air. A searing beam of light flooded the whole village. Vivi's eyes flew open, shock slamming into her. Muffy had turned into living flesh. Vivi demanded to know what it meant, and whether it really was Muffy. Cruz flashed a grin, and declared Muffy had become breathtakingly beautiful. Alfred declared the consecration a ritual where the priest pours sacred power straight into the armor, and Luke nodded, sealing the young man's assumption. Alfred shot a sharp question, "Is that technique really that powerful?" Luca grinned, "I read about it in the taverns." "This isn't the priest's mighty power, it's an old ritual," Alfred snapped, "and at best the Cruz can only summon the lower ghosts." Cruz is special, he channels the hero's power, turbocharging the technique many times over and turning it into the power of a god. Cruz barked out an awkward laugh. Alfred jabbed a finger at the girl and demanded to know what she'd done. Vivi's voice cracked as she blurted, "What happened to Muffy?" Luca roared that it was some kind of sanctification of the undead. Muffy had been turned into a holy bull. Then it hit her, and she cried out that Muffy had definitely become Saint Muffy. Cruz swears she can feel a holy aura pouring off Muffy. Vivi nods that she feels it too. Cruz whoops that it's awesome. Luca agrees and Coletta screams that she loves Muffy. The wolf cub exploded into a howl. Alfred blurted that somehow it sounded happy, then called for Femi. She wasn't there. Alfred spun to Colette and demanded, "Have you seen Femi?" She shook her head. She hadn't seen him since they were here. Alfred called Femi a hiding pro, but a prick of worry crawled up his spine. He spun toward the wrestling racket and shouted, "Femi, where did you go?" Femi burst from the forest with a wolf clamped in her fangs and threw the words at Alfred. She needed his help. Alfred barked, "Are you okay?" And Femi shot back that the wolf had plunged deep into the forest and bore the exact same symptoms as the Cruz. Alfred barked that if the poison really had a timed trigger, they'd talk later. He'd haul the wolves here himself and let Millet examine them. "I'll intone the rights to summon Millet here." The girl bolts off, screaming she'll fetch her this instant, and Vivi howls she'll conjure a restoration magic circle. Femi admitted she hadn't touched the Hydra's meat. When Alfred pressed her, she shrugged and said her ravenous minions had swarmed the carcass, so she let them feast. They reached the place, and Alfred's eyes snapped to a massive pack of wolves sprawled across the ground. The moment he heard Cruz was in danger, the wolves vanished from his mind. The young man dropped to his knees and begged forgiveness, but Lucas snapped that apologies could wait. They had to get the wolves to the village now, and Alfred promised they'd take care of them. Cruz hauls 2 wolves at once and roars she can handle the job. Lucas snaps that she's banking everything on the girl. Alfred barked at Femi to hoist him and sprint. His magic needs a few tense minutes to charge. The young man hoists every wolf into the air and snarls he'll pull them all together at once. Gravity magic isn't something anyone handles that easily. Alfred soared atop Fem, his magic hauling a snarling pack of wolves in tow, and Crew grinned, saying it was exactly the kind of thing Alfred would do. They'd almost reached the village. Millet, Coletta, and Vivi had summoned everyone here, and Vivi warned she'd drawn a magic circle to ease their pain, but it wouldn't do much. Vivi admitted her magic wouldn't be enough. Femi reported stomach pain, relentless vomiting, and crushing weakness. Millet crouched over the wolves, eyes flashing with recognition. I understand these symptoms match Cruz's, she said, snapping into motion to prepare the medicine and asking them to wait a minute, and Alfred thanked the girl. Femi's confessed she'd done something wrong, and the admission ripped at the pride and fragile confidence of the king of the magical wolves, while Alfred slammed a hand down and insisted she stop blaming herself. This wasn't only her fault. Luca leans in, eyes drilling the wolf, and snaps, "You really don't find this strange?" Alfred's jaw tightens, he's wrestling with the same doubt. Cruz slammed a call to Luca. The girl blurted that Alfred had once eaten hydra. Its flesh isn't poisonous, the danger wasn't from venom, and Cruz agreed. Luca jabbed Cruz with the question, had the girl forgotten she'd been poisoned? Cruz just smiled and said she had, and Luca later uncovered that the poison probably wasn't on the meat and likely hadn't caused the illnesses. A wolf with a razor-sharp nose will scent it and spot it long before he sinks his teeth. Femi says that's a given. Luca's snarled that the hydra was abnormal from the first spark. Growing a head right away was impossible, and she swore she'd never heard of such a thing. Luca pleads with Alfred for hydrobile. Alfred complies, handing the girl a jar brimming with the sickly, viscous liquid. Lucas's eyes widened as he declared it huge at first glance. Cruz recoiled, snarling that its aura was unbearably unpleasant. Alfred snapped at the girl, demanding she explain. Cruz snaps that a strange energy clings to her, and it puts her on edge. Alfred admits she scares him sometimes. Luca urgently asks to rush it to the royal lab so she can inspect it. Does Alfred side with her? Alfred proclaims Luca researches magical beasts, so she's a flat-out genius. Millet cuts them off with a sharp apology for keeping the boys waiting, warns the potion's a little bitter, and urges them to drink it to their health. They ladle the medicine into bowls and push them to the wolves. Femi says the pack already looks much better. Lucas snarls that she drank every drop herself and Cruz didn't, and Cruz insists that's not true. Millet insisted tomorrow all the wolves would be much better, and Alfred nodded, matching her hope. Femi bows and Ceci grin and nod their thanks. Millet shrugs no thanks, and Alfred steps up, vowing to keep watch over the wolves with Femi tonight. Muffy suddenly springs to life. The boy vows she'll watch over them too. Luca snaps she'll study the bile to uncover what's really going on, and Alfred shrugs, leaving it all in the boy's hands. Alfred exhaled, relief flooding him as he declared he was glad everyone had gone to bed peacefully. Maybe Muffy radiated a healing aura. Alfred's gaze snaps to Femi. She's frantically licking wolf after wolf, worry carved into every movement. Alfred snuffed the lamp's candle, grinned thinking Femi the best king and certain they'd be safe, and the whole house drifted off to sleep. The wolf cubs jolt Alfred awake at dawn. He rubs his eyes, says it seems all right, and wishes all the wolves a good morning. He fixes his eyes on the distant adult wolves and exhales, saying he's very glad they're all healthy. Femi rushes over to Alfred and thanks him for helping save her pack. She's crushed that Femi's the only one who can't help, but Alfred snaps her out of it, insisting it's not over, urging her to grab breakfast now so they can dive straight into the Hydra mystery. He flashes a confident grin and vows they'll solve this problem together with Fem at his side. Fem seizes the moment, declaring this is her chance to prove she's useful too. She summons the young man to join him, begging him to let her repay the debt. Hours later, Femi, Alfred, Vivi, Cruz, and Luca returned to the scarred clearing where they'd slain the Hydra just yesterday. Lucas insisted they'd pry loose the immortal Hydra's secret here. Vivi said she felt no magic left. Alfred said it was strange. He'd butchered it, incinerated it, and buried it, yet somehow not a single trace remained, and it shook him to his core. Femi admitted she was completely confused. Alfred snapped, "Do you actually understand any of this?" And the wolf pledged she'd try to track something down. Vivi swept her gaze across the area, froze when something on the ground caught her eye, and called Alfred to look at the exact spot she'd found. She raked her foot across the dirt, exposing a hidden magic circle, and crowing that the colossal sigil had swelled the monster to titanic size. Alfred grinned, exactly what I expected from Vivi. Vivi's sly laugh curled through the air, then Cruz's voice crashed in, calling Alfred and declaring she'd found something. Alfred barreled over to Cruz as the girl blurted that a massive horde of monsters had swarmed in, and it was catastrophic, so they tore to the scene and gaped in stunned disbelief. Alfred couldn't tell what it was. A whole horde of monsters swarmed it. Lucas warned they were 3 times bigger than the Hydra, and she couldn't even look, because if one of them slipped into the city, it would be razed to the ground. Femi snapped they couldn't let them leave the forest, and Cruz snatched her sword, snarling they'd stop them right then. Alfred realized the Hydra had broken free from those monsters, and panic snapped through him. Who would enlarge these abominations, and where on earth did they come from? Cruz launched a sharp, urgent question at Alfred. "Can I attack?" He met her with a calm nod and a promise. "Don't overexert yourself. I'll cover you," and Cruz agreed. Out of nowhere, Cruz was ambushed. A magician materialized, smirking that the girl dodged impressively and plotting how to lure her out. Then she stepped forward herself, saving him a lot of energy. Alfred demanded, "Who are you and what do you want from us?" The stranger sneered, "I'm not interested in people." He's fixated on the girl, one of the heavenly kings, then points at Vivi as the boy snarls that she asked for the plan to restore the demon king's army, branding her a traitor. He rips back his hood and declares, "I am one of the 12 heavens T's, the cleanser of filth." Vivi freezes, voice trembling as she insists she doesn't know him. The girl wheels on Alfred and fires the question at him, and Alfred snaps that he knows no one like that. Tease explodes, demanding if Vivi is really making fun of him. The young man roared that Vivi was the weakest of the 4 heavenly kings, accusing her of wrecking the dragon's invasion plan. He swore he'd never forgive her. Alfred's mind snapped into place. This man had forged dragons with dark magic, and Alfred spat, "Fine, even if that's true, what can the boy do? Are the demons just going to stand around and chat?" He sneered that he apparently loved to talk, but it changed nothing. They were all going to die here. Then he summoned his monsters. He snarls for him to kill everyone, but a sudden force shreds the monsters, and Tiss's jaw drops in shock. Out of nowhere, Cruz materializes behind him. Tiss smiles and warns the girl not to do it. Cruz freezes, stunned. Suddenly, the monster in the form of a huge snake unleashed its keen, piercing eyesight and blinded the Cruz. The glare was unbearably bright. Tiss declared it beautiful. The basilisk's petrifying stare robbed everyone of any chance to defend themselves. Cruz said it was bright. She rips a piece off the snake, smirks, and says it's fine, it can't be harmed by that. Tiss gapes, shock flattening his face as he blurts, "Why didn't it work?" Lucas snarls, "Time to finish this." The basilisk unleashes its petrifying stare, it fizzles uselessly, and Luca rockets behind the monster. She catapults upward, slashing the monster. At the same heartbeat, Alfred unleashes his magic and detonates the huge basilisk's body. The hulking monster lunges at Alfred. Femi throws herself over him and slashes it down with razor-sharp claws. Alfred flings his hand forward again and flames eat the monster alive. Tease reels in disbelief, staring at the monsters he'd killed. Tease snaps at the boy, "They're like that," and Alfred just shrugs, "Doesn't matter, they're just passing S-rank adventurers." Tease buries his face in his hands and howls with laughter, admitting he thought he'd breeze through it, but people kept getting in his way. Cruz bellowed to Alfred that the monster's wounds were knitting closed, and in a heartbeat, the hydra surged back to life. Tease cackles, taunting that humans got lucky. These monsters regenerate at blinding speed, invulnerable zombie soldiers who will never fall. Let them play all they want, death is already stalking them. Alfred's convinced he's cracked it. The circle and the wolves gorged on the hydra's flesh and ended up racked with stomachaches. A zombie transformation clawed into him. Though dead, those monsters stayed bound to this place and were controlled by one of the 12 heavens. Lucas snarled at Alpha, "We can fight forever, but your strength and magic will eventually run dry." Femi snarled at Alfred that she could kill the Steeman. Alfred raised a hand and told the wolf they'd wait. Alfred snarled they'll slaughter only the zombies, because the demon must stay alive, and now he'll stand trial in the capital. Femi's voice cut through the chaos. "Alfred, what are we doing?" Alfred barked at the wolf, "Run straight into the heart of those monsters." Alfred rings Tiss to thank him for sharing the info, but when Tiss meets his stare, Alfred blurts that he's actually a little angry with him. He was convinced they could crush the monster. Cruz screamed, "Mr. Alfred, what do we do?" Alfred vows to unleash his magic and make waves, summoning Luca and Cruz to charge in beside him. Luca said she agreed, though it nearly broke her. Alfred barked the order to have the girls cut off their heads. Cruz sneered that it was easy. Tease froze in shock, and Alfred snapped for the girls to keep cutting off heads. Quiet whispers said they'd stopped, and it was useless. At that moment, the young man thrust his hand out and summoned the Ice Queen, who ruled the heavens and bent the void to her will. He implored her to fling open the void's gates and reveal the absolute world secret. He thundered to sky and darkness that he would freeze the impure of this world with a heavenly hammer. The boy's name is Alfred Lent. A towering pillar of ice shot up before Alfred, freezing every monster solid. Tiss's legs locked in the ice, and the boy gasped that he couldn't move. Alfred suddenly rides up and snarls to Tiss that he's been caught. Tiss crashes to the dirt, sputtering that the boy's joking and asking if he's really an S-rank adventurer. Only a real monster could wield magic like that, Tiss says he should have guessed. Vivi, the weakest of the 4 heavenly kings, couldn't stand against the dragons, so the young man charged in and vanquished them. Alfred snarled he wasn't alone, bound Tiss with swift, merciless hands, but the boy shot back there was only one way out. He smirks and snarls that the traitors must be destroyed. Alfred's jaw drops and he instantly screams for Vivi. A titanic hydra crashed through the trees as Vivi grinned. "I've been waiting for you." The beast lunged at the girl, and Vivi, seated beside a glowing magic seal, slammed her hand into it. Vines erupted from the magical seal, lashing around the hydra and pinning it tight, while Vivi choked that she'd never be able to break these bonds. In a heartbeat, the plants shredded the hydra to ribbons. Alfred whirled to the young man and snapped. "Anything else to say?" The boy slumped in the field, his creations charred and encased in ice, and Alfred turned to Vivi, awe burning in his chest, and told her she had created a great circle. Vivi handed the battle to Alfred and the others. Then, to be safe, she sketched a glowing magic circle that locked the monster's movements solid. Alfred raked his hand over the girl's head and declared he understood. It was the right call. Vivi flushed and begged the boy to stop, mortified by the whole scene. Alfred grins and declares the matter settled. They can head back, and right then Femi stands there with Tis clenched in her teeth. Femi clamped a demon in her mouth, while Alfred blurted to Cruz that her stomach hurt. She'd swallowed a zombie. Cruz shot, "She can't eat that. What's so bad about it?" Lucas snarled that to turn them into zombies, they'd have to be stripped of every last scrap of freedom. That's why she coats her body in all kinds of harmful magic. This time the zombies towered like living mountains, coming back again and again under layered curses. "Their flesh is cursed, you can't eat it," and the crew said it was terrifying. Luca leaned in and vowed she'd reveal one last thing. Parasites that can turn you into a zombie are real, but magic can banish them from the girl, and the crews will no longer have stomach pains. Cruz dives into a chilling rundown of parasites and zombies. Alfred lights up, convinced the millet cure might work, so Cruz has to learn everything about it. The young man starts to talk about Millet. Before he can finish, Cruz explodes into motion and storms straight at Millet. Millet was tending the wolves when Cruz burst in, yelling that she wasn't in pain and pounding a warning about the insects, and Millet snapped for Cruz to calm down. Millet insisted everything was fine and that she had a cure. Cruz warned she'd turn into a zombie and could die. Millet spotted the boys and called out a greeting. Alfred snapped, "Someone's definitely never eating weird stuff again," and Cruz nodded, backing the boys. Millet strode up to Alfred, thanked him for his work, and asked if they were finished. Alfred jabbed a finger at Tis and told the girl they were finished. Cruz and Luca showered the wolves with pats as the animals melted into contentment, and Luca beamed that it was all thanks to Millet's medicine and the holy beast Muffy's power. Vivi's brow nodded. She couldn't make sense of the girl's words. Luca replied steady, "Sometimes the beast spirit can cleanse the curse," and Vivi's eyes snapped to Muffy, sitting beside the wolves and beaming. Vivi burst into tears of joy and bolted to Muffy, wrapping her in a fierce hug, and Alfred beamed at the girls. He locked his gaze on Tis, stone-cold serious. The youth ripped the bandage from his mouth. He declared the youth and his friends had summoned zombie dragons in the western mountains, and they had failed. The young man snaps that this time they've taken on the hydra and the basilisk, then lashes out, "Do you really think you can resurrect the king's army with a demon?" Tis smirked and proclaimed the demon king's resurrection inevitable. Until then, everyone should live in fear. Alfred sneered that the demon king would never be resurrected, and instantly he saw the boy clamp his mouth shut. He didn't want to talk. Alfred snarls that the zombie conversion technique is unstable. One hydra became a catastrophic failure, and the parasites are the ones crafting them for the young man, since he doesn't possess the core power. Alfred called for Vivi. She sprinted to his side as he demanded to know if the Demon King's army had a zombie expert. Vivi shook her head, saying she didn't think so because the Demon King had forbidden the sale of zombies. Alfred and the other adventurers steamrolled her. She bolted from the front early and still has no idea what happened afterward. Tis declared the Demon Lord had let zombies wield magic, and that revelation exposed Vivi, one of the 4 heavenly kings, as painfully stupid. Alfred snapped his finger and summoned Fem. She clamped Tis in her teeth and shook him like a rag doll, and when there was nothing left to squeeze from him, they hauled him off to the capital. After a while, Millet fired up the stove and whipped up dinner. Lucas cut through the silence and said they needed to talk. They agreed to leave the village the next morning. Tisma stands on trial, gratitude burning in her chest for the kind souls she found in this village. Millet hurled herself into Lucas's arms, sobs ripping out of her. He told the girl she'd end up lonely. Luca collapsed into sobs, begging her not to do it. Cruz and Colette hit the floor, squirming and begging not to leave, and Alfred couldn't help thinking they were like children. Luca warned Cruz the capital was drowning her in work. Cruz nodded. Alfred promised she could come to them anytime. Cruz's voice trembled as she asked if that was really true. Cruz gave a firm nod, and Lucas declared they'd have to bid farewell to Millet's incredible cooking, so they vowed to feast today. A jubilant evening swept in. Everyone tore into delicious food and laughed, soaking up every moment. Alfred froze as Vivian's crew huddled in hushed whispers. By morning they were saying their goodbyes, and he quietly wished the girl a safe journey home. The girls flooded the room with thanks. Luke urged Alfred to take care of himself, and Alfred agreed before whispering that his presence here must stay a secret. They march off. Alfred snaps at the girls that it's time to work. Millet yells she'll help the headman, and Vivi darts off to feed the cows. Alfred declares he'll handle his duty, sinks into a chair, pledges to watch over the girls, and urges them to give it their all today. The girls pleaded with the young man to guard his knee. Everything rests on Alfred. Rewind to the instant before Luca and Cruz met Alfred. The Dark Mage's zombie dragons loomed over the capital, and S-rank adventurers Cruz and Luca exploded into action to stop the onslaught. Luca called Cruz. She wanted a break, and Luca snapped that it was a pity she hadn't raised the Dark Mage's lab. She was already one step too late and now had to decide to finish everything at once. The zombie dragon ghosts vanished in an instant. Luca gaped and laughed, calling it bizarre, like someone had just wiped them out, but Cruz scowled, refusing to believe they were gone, and snapped that it wouldn't be that easy. Cruz's instincts screamed a warning. He announced a dark omen, and Luca couldn't help but blurt, "Zombie dragons." Cruz shot back that it wasn't, it could be a hydra, and Luca's eyes went wide as he blurted, "Where did it come from?" Luca sprinted after Cruz, shouting that she couldn't do everything alone. Cruz tore off into the distance, and Luca screamed that she was heading for the village of Merg. Weariness slammed into Luca. She had no idea Cruz could outrun a horse, and she knew her body and heart weren't worthy of being called a gift from heaven. Then it hit her. She didn't know where to go. She reached the village gate, wondering if the people inside were truly good, when the village chief suddenly strode up and asked, "Are you a traveler?" She shot back that she was an adventurer, and the headman bristled as he demanded whether she'd truly come here alone. The village chief practically shouted that the girl was breathtaking, wearing a barely their dress out in the middle of nowhere. Surprise slammed into them, a prickle of suspicion crawling up their spine, and she just smiled, saying they'd split up and she'd come for supplies. She reached to hand the license to the village elder when a chill crawled up her spine. She shouted she'd step away for a minute. Magic surged into Luca, and a cold suspicion slammed into him. These weren't zombie dragons. Luca's froze as a titanic skeleton loomed before him, colossal, maybe a new kind of monster, and he screamed at Vivi, "What are you doing here?" Vivi snapped at Luca to shut him up, vowing she'd never forgive the girl if she dared interfere with Muffy's resurrection, and Luca gaped, stunned that the girl was raising the undead. Luca dropped a bomb. Vivi was one of the 4 heavenly kings. Vivi's eyes shot wide, stunned that the girl knew her name. Luca smirked and insisted she had never forgotten her face. Vivi's smirk curled as she declared that even in a place like this she would be recognized. Then she barked for the girl to kneel in front of her. Luca ignored her and barreled straight at the towering skeleton. Vivi shouted, "What are you doing?" and shattered her magic circle. Luca's gut screamed the truth. The zombie dragons were the demons doing, and someone was trying to resurrect the Demon King's army. Luca vows she'll annihilate evil without hesitation. Vivi screams that the girl is the evil, ignites her magic, and orders her to disappear. Luca recognizes the volley as fire bullets, but knows they'll never reach her. A bullet ripped into the girl's knee. She crumpled to the ground, and Vivi said the girl remained on her knees. A piercing scream ripped through the air. The girls spun and saw Alfred's house consumed by roaring flames. Regret slammed into Luca and Vivi. Millet barged in, snapping that she was sure they'd understood everything. Alfred grinned and said it was good that things were like that, and the girls' jaws dropped as they realized Millet was unbelievably good. The moment Luca and Cruz left, Merg plunged into an eerie hush, the village guard standing idle once more with nothing to do. Alfred clamps down on his worry, telling himself the girls might come back, then grimaces. Yeah, they were annoying, but sometimes it's kind of nice to see them. Vivi snapped him out of his thoughts and grinned, pointing out that Alfred had been yawning for ages. Alfred agreed, and Vivi smiled, saying it couldn't be helped. Defending the village was painfully boring, and the young man agreed. He swears Femi and Muffy have arrived. The village already bristles with defenses, and soon he won't be needed here at all. In a blink, they scrambled to resurrect an army of demons on the village's edge, backed by dragons, hydras, and a basilisk. Fear slammed into him. The villagers didn't know, and that terrified him. He had to prove his worth to the village, so he whirled to Vivi and demanded to know what was happening and what she was staring at. Vivi sounded the alarm about the field. The young man blinked, bewildered, not understanding as she declared the village's land spoiled. Alfred zeroed in on the plants and, echoing the girl, declared they were barely bearing fruit. Then the young man leaned in and challenged her. Did she really understand what was happening just by looking? Vivi agreed, eyes grim. Magic ore had seeped into the hot springs, and Alfred snapped. Isn't it bad that the ores mixed into the farmland soil? Vivi snaps in agreement, declaring the Demon King's land's poverty springs from the demons, or the poison stuff, lurking in its soil. Alfred's face lit up as he blurted he'd heard Vivi was spearheading land reclamation. Vivi nodded. Alfred burst into a grin and declared that's what the 4 heavenly kings do. He's counting on her. Vivi turns betrayed with embarrassment as Alfred mulls over farming, admits he's never done it, and declares Vivi will be useful here. She seizes his hand and agrees. Vivi vows she'll cleanse this land right here, and the boy stumbles back, shouting, "What are you talking about?" Alfred demanded, "Why?" And Vivi cut in without warning, snapping, "You're bored being a security guard." Alfred concedes it's true. Vivi vows the duty of improving the farmland falls squarely on her. She roars that with their own hands they'll build the richest farm and it'll be a blast, and the young man thinks Vivi looks inspired. Alfred nods and agrees, vowing they'll scrub this place spotless. He'll happily tuck into tasty vegetables, and the inhabitants will start to feel better. Alfred snaps that they need the village chief's permission first. Vivi rockets off, shouting she'll get it. The boy whirls to Femi and pleads to fell part of the forest. Femi barks a sharp yes, and the village chief steps forward to give Vivi his consent. After a moment, Vivi snaps that they'll clear the area and plant magic circles to cleanse the land, sweeping everything here clean with ease. Alfred declares Millet and the others will jump in to help. Millet grins that it looks funny, and the mayor throws his support behind it. The girl exclaims it's wonderful they chose to support rural residents through agriculture. Femi thunders that, as the king of the magical wolves, she'll help dig the holes for the vegetables. Alfred reads the wolf's intent, nods, and gives the girl the go-ahead. Vivi goes quiet for a beat, then insists Muffy should come along too. Alfred snaps that Muffy's too big to work with them. Vivi snaps that Muffy's a spirit beast and swears she can shrink. If Femi could go, why can't Muffy? Femi erupts into a feral growl as Vivi dives behind Alfred, screaming for Femi to stay away, and Muffy strides up to them. The boy blurts to her, "Can Muffy shrink?" Muffy chirps a tiny sound and Alfred's jaw drops. She answered. Alfred leaned in and asked Vivi if she understood her. Vivi snapped that Muffy claimed he could shrink. Femi snaps that Muffy begged the girl to touch him, and Muffy can't even understand human language. Alfred throws up his hands and concedes there's nothing to be done. They'll take Muffy another time. She's morphed into a spirit beast, and maybe later Vivi will figure out how to shrink her back. Millet urged the boys to spare no effort for Muffy. Vivi cradled her, whispering how sorry she was and begging Muffy to watch over them from here. Vivi storms up to Alfred and Melee, firing them to start. Alfred agrees, but demands they shut everything down first. Vivi nods and accepts. He barked, "Leave it to me, I'll fix it in a flash," and Vivi shouted at the young man to stop rushing. She snapped a warning, "Logging's fragile, Alfred, don't overdo it." The boy rushed out an apology to the girl, and Millet urged them to proceed slowly. Millet vowed she'd jump in and help. Vivi declared they'd call a break the moment tiredness set in, and Alfred stood there baffled, not following the girls at all. He snaps, "Do the girls really treat me like an old man?" Then waves off the worry, "She's no newbie and can handle it." Millet snapped, "No, it's not so," then grabbed his hand, voice trembling, "I'm worried about the boy's knee," and Alfred froze, utterly stunned. He never expected Millet to fuss this fiercely over her body. He's grateful and mortified, but he thanks her outright and vows to do everything he can. Vivi drags the boy to the clearing, jabs at the trees, and asks if he can chop them down here. Alfred agrees. Vivi nods and says the boy can begin. Alfred smirks, sure a sliver of magic will be enough, then he brings his blade down and fells the tree. The tree toppled straight at the girls. Alfred lunged, snatched Millet out of danger, and shouted, "Are you okay?" Millet thanked the boy and insisted she was fine. Alfred winced, convinced his knee was a little sore because of it, and the whole moment felt painfully awkward. Vivi screamed, "I knew this would happen," and warned the boy to be careful. Alfred winced at her clumsy farming, but he couldn't deny they'd finally planted the first seed.